I have a story that happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle Mark went on a mission at 19. They sent him to the Indian reservation in Arizona, and they paired him up with a companion called Carl. When they first got there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and unsure what was happening, they climbed under the table for cover. Mark could distinctly hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people, and after about 5 minutes, it stopped. That next day they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The families got very quiet and told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange but tried to not think of it. The next night it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth and again climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights, and any time they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them away. They then go into a convenience store and they were talking about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said that they can't talk about it. It's forbidden. Confused, they asked him, "Can't talk about what?" And the guy continued to tell them about skinwalkers. He says that they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, they will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, threw it open and yelled, "Hey!" But when he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 appeared to be wolves, and 1 was as large as a bear, but they looked strange, with almost human features, and he watched them run towards the trees. All 3 of them did so standing on 2 legs, and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so badly that they called their mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day, and for a year nothing happened. One day they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at around 8 p.m. and met Jimmy and went to leave. The mission president told Jimmy that while they were driving through the area it might be dangerous, so to not make any stops, and that if he needed to use the restroom, to go now. Jimmy replies saying he was fine. The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark, and with that they hit the road. As they were around half hour into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries, and Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to pee, badly. The mission president insists that they couldn't stop here and that he will need to hold it. Jimmy insisted he can't hold it, so the mission president reluctantly stops the car and impresses upon him the seriousness of being quick. With a look of confusion, Jimmy just says, "Alright," opens the door and starts peeing. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out and ask what's going on, but the mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. That's when all of a sudden Mark sees something next to the car on his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until they finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president just says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business."
Working on cruise ships, you hear all kinds of wild stories. Old sea legends, drunken crew tales, and occasionally, stories about other stuff. Dark stuff. Most of it's just harmless chatter passed around the mess halls and smoke decks. But every now and then something sticks. About 4 years ago, I was working a South American season, Rio, Buenos Aires, Valparaiso. I spent most of my off hours hanging out with the Brazilian crew. Good people, loud, funny, and always up for a laugh. The gift shop manager was especially outspoken. He'd always be complaining mostly about how lazy his team was, how they fake being sick or skip shifts for the dumbest reasons. But his favorite rant? That his staff kept saying they saw a little girl running around the gift shop, always late at night and always when no passengers were around. He'd laugh it off, say they were just trying to get out of work. "They're scared of a damn ghost child now?" he said once, rolling his eyes. "Ridículo." One night a group of us, him, me, and the head of photography, were sitting in the back of the staff cafe drinking a cheap machine coffee. It was just after midnight. The ship was gently rocking as we cut through the dark water. The gift shop manager was especially wound up, fuming about how he was going to have to cover for 2 of his team again. "Lazy cowards," he kept saying, making up ghost stories like children. A few hours later, my cabin rings. It's the photo manager, and she sounds rattled. "Can I come to your room?" she asks. "Now?" "He's here, and something happened." I thought maybe someone had gotten bad news from home, perhaps a death in the family, so I rushed over. But when I stepped into her cabin, I found him there, the same bolsterous, tough-as-nail guy huddled on the edge of her bed, shoulders shaking, his face pale as a sheet. He was crying. After a few minutes, he told me what happened. He'd been working alone in the small back office tucked just behind the clothing section of the gift shop. His room itself faced a long mirror that ran almost the full length of the outer wall. He said it started with a soft giggling sound. At first, he thought maybe someone's kid had gotten into the shop, but it was past midnight, and the entire deck was closed and sealed off. The only people who would be around were crew sneaking food or guests gambling in the casino. He looked up, and that's when he saw her in the mirror. A tiny shadow barely the height of the counter peeking around the edge of the open office door, only visible in the reflection, like she was leaning around to watch him, half curious, half playing a game. He turned around, but there was nothing. But in the mirror she was still there. He said his blood turned to ice, and every hair on his body stood on end. At first he couldn't move, he just locked eyes with her in the glass. Then she laughed and vanished out of sight. He bolted and ran full speed out of the shop, all the way to the crew's stairwell, and didn't stop until he found the photo manager and begged her to let him stay in her room. He swore he'd seen something that didn't belong on this ship anymore. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't the type of person to make things up, and I'd never seen him like that, cracked open, terrified and broken. The next day, I brought it up to my boss, half joking and half expecting her to roll her eyes. But to my surprise, she didn't laugh. She just looked at me, her face suddenly serious, and said, "You don't know the story." Apparently, 2 decades ago, a little girl had been on board with her parents. They'd just finished a family show in the theatre and were heading back to their room. The girl was running ahead, excited and laughing like kids do, when she slipped away near the gift shop too fast for her parents to catch. She ran through the shop, into the casino, and then towards the atrium. The atrium is a massive open space within the center of the ship, lined with glass elevators, and it stretches from deck 12 all the way to deck 5, a long, vertical drop surrounded by shiny chrome rails and hanging lights. The little girl leaned over the railing, a bit too far, and fell. They say her neck snapped instantly when she hit the marble floor below, and apparently she never left. Crew over the years have said the same thing. They hear giggles, see shadows, items are moved, that they catch fleeting glimpses of a little girl just out of sight. Some even claimed they'd seen the elevators move on their own in the middle of the night, always stopping at deck 7, right where she took her last steps while being alive. I still don't know what to make of it. I'm not a superstitious person, and I've worked dozens of ships and heard many ghost stories. But after seeing him that night, I believed him. And I believe she's still there.
I'm an emergency medical technician, and about a month ago we got a call for a really bad car accident with 2 passengers. I found out after the fact that a teenage guy still in high school and his girlfriend were doing 90+ miles an hour in a Mustang, and a cop saw them and went to pull them over. But instead, the guy took off. The guy took a turn way too fast and slid into a pole. We got to the scene and found the car had slid into the pole and wrapped itself around it. It almost looked like a game of horseshoe. The passenger side hit the pole, and his girlfriend was very clearly dead, likely on impact. Her head was flattened on the side, her eyes hanging out, with brain oozing out of her nose and most major bones clearly broken. The teenage guy was semi-conscious. He was looking around in shock, trying to figure out what had just happened. He had blood coming from his ears and nose. His right cheekbone caved in. We managed to get him out the car with surprising ease, as the driver's side of the car wasn't damaged bad enough to jam the door shut. We cut off his clothes, put him on a stretcher with a collar on, and immediately put him in the ambulance and floored it the whole way to the hospital. I could see every time he took a breath, his broken ribs would pop in and out while I listened to his lungs fill with blood. I could see major bruising take place on his torso and he was starting to fade. I just became an EMT a few months before this, so I was new and didn't really know what to do. All of a sudden he stopped breathing and we hooked him onto a ventilator. I was frantic. This was one of my first major calls and I'd never seen anything like this. My more experienced partner, a paramedic, remained calm and tried to assure me that everything would be okay. And just as I was starting to calm down a bit more, the patient went into cardiac arrest. I began performing CPR, and I could feel his ribs were broken as I performed it, and my partner hooked him up onto the life support. Shortly after we arrived to the hospital, my partner and I rushed out of the ambulance to get the patient in. A trauma team was already waiting for us, and my partner told them everything that happened to us as the guy's mum arrived. She was frantic, and I had to try and keep her away from her son as she asked me what happened. I explained to her what happened and that he was on life support and a ventilator, and the hysterical mum was like, "Life support?" "Yes, he's on life support. We're getting him to surgery as we speak." At this point, my partner comes back over to me after relaying all the information to the trauma team, and the mum asked me, "So you mean to tell me if you took him off life support he'd be dead?" And my partner solemnly replies back with, "No. What I mean to tell you is that he is dead, and we're trying to bring him back." We excused ourselves as we had more calls to attend to. We later found out from the surgeon on hand that about 15 minutes after the arrival of the patient, he succumbed to his injuries. It's so haunting to me, hearing his lungs fill with blood and seeing his broken ribs move with his breathing, seeing his look of shock as he coughed up blood from his nose and mouth. I can't handle coins anymore because the metal smell reminds me of the smell of blood. I can't see things with ketchup or syrup or similar because it reminds me too much of all the blood. I can't unsee any of this stuff, and it haunts me. I have nightmares frequently about it. I don't think I'm gonna last in this job. This happened roughly 30 years ago, and it's something that I've only told a few select people about until now. It happened one night when me and my girlfriend at the time drove to the beach. After work, I went to pick her up, and we headed straight there. However, when we arrived, the beach was already pitch dark. I mean, we should have known better not to go so late, but for some reason we both really wanted to go that night after work, and it was roughly 10 p.m. by the time we left the car. We were talking in the car eating our McDonald's. We had stopped on the way to look out into the darkness. At least we could see the waves rolling against the beach. That was worth the drive, I suppose. I told my girlfriend that I couldn't stay too long because I had work early in the morning, but she didn't respond. I thought that she might have been annoyed at me for saying I had to leave so soon. I looked over at her and noticed that she seemed to be transfixed on something at sea. "What is it?" I asked her. She didn't answer, so I looked in the direction she was looking and saw a strong beam of light swaying across the waves far from the shoreline. "Is that a squid fishing boat or something?" I said to her. "That's not a squid fishing boat, the light's not right. You don't think it's getting closer, do you?" I looked out at sea and agreed the bright light was definitely approaching. It was shaking as it moved along the waves, and it appeared to be heading right for the shore. Maybe it's a fireball. Fireballs are will-o-wisp-like paranormal phenomena in Japan, visually a little orb-like thing. The balls of fire appear at night and are said to be the souls of those who've been separated from their earthbound bodies. If it was a fireball, then it wouldn't shine so brightly now. Surely that's a UFO. She said it excitedly. I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know until that point that she had an interest in the paranormal or the occult. I looked at the mysterious light a little closer, and she was right. It wasn't a flickering kind of dim light that you might expect to see when you think of a fireball. It was a strong, bright searchlight shining down at the waves. I heard myself absent-mindedly agreeing with her by saying, "Yeah, guess it could be a UFO." At that point, it was only about 200 to 300 meters away from us. That might sound a little strange, so let me just say the beach that we drove to was a very secluded one. The shore wasn't that far away from where you would park. We liked the beach because there was never anyone around at night, and there wasn't much light in the area. It was perfect for a nice, secluded evening date. As the light of what we thought was a UFO approached, I noted that I wasn't scared. I just thought to myself, wow, this could be a UFO. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal. My girlfriend then said, "Hey, isn't the light getting to the shoreline now?" It sure was. I snapped out of the state of awe and began to panic. I saw the light go over the waves at the shore and knew it was about to illuminate the sand on the beach next. The gravity of the situation set in for me. "Put your seatbelt on, we gotta get out of here." I started the ignition and pulled a U-turn and drove out of the beach at breakneck speed. As I drove, my girlfriend continued to stare at the light. I heard her call out in a frightened voice, "The light's right on where we were parked." I was really panicking and I was driving for our lives. I felt like a rally driver at one point and drifted out onto the sand. Finally, we made it back onto the road, which was well lit, and the sense of security we lost down by the shore slowly returned to us. I pulled over and I remember I had goosebumps all over my arms, and when I took my hands off the steering wheel, I noticed that they were drenched in sweat. We spent the rest of the journey in a hushed silence. I think neither of us knew what to say to comfort the other. If she was anything like me, she was replaying it over and over in her head. That weird overhead light advancing on us was coming straight for us. I dropped her off at her place, and when I got back to mine, I just laid down on my bed. I was there wondering if what had happened truly happened or if it was some kind of dream. I met my girlfriend the following day and asked her outright. That wasn't a dream, wasn't it? Of course not. I was there with you, she replied. She seemed a little skeptical that day. I don't know how to describe it. I do wonder what that was, she would ask rhetorically. Last night she had been so sure it was a UFO, but now she was questioning herself, it seemed. Of course, I didn't know what it was myself, so I didn't have an answer for her. Well, that's where it sort of ended, I guess. One thing I can tell you is I ended up marrying that girlfriend, and 20 years on from that night at the beach, the memory of that strange bright overhead searchlight has faded away. But one evening we watched a TV show about Japanese national abduction cases. For those unaware, there are a large number of missing person cases which are tied to North Korea. About 470 people have been abducted according to the Japanese government as of November 2021, and abduction cannot be ruled out for a further 873 individuals. And during this TV show they showed a map which had all the locations where they believed that the abductees were captured and kidnapped. What did we see on that map? Well, none other than the secluded beach we drove to that night 20-something years ago. I looked at my wife and she was staring stunned at the TV. We didn't encounter a UFO that night. We likely encountered a North Korean ship coming to shore. They could have easily seen us pull in and park up. I felt a chill race down my spine when I realized that we could have ended up as victims if I didn't drive off when I did, and could have easily have been taken. Since that day, whenever North Korea appears on the news, I think to myself how lucky I am to live the peaceful life I now have with my wife. The realization that it wasn't a UFO, but people with evil intentions, was hands down the scariest moment of my life. I was 9 when this happened. My sister, my dad, my stepmom and I were at a place called Palmetto Island. It was a camping resort where you just pull up with a tent or camper and stay there for a weekend or so. We were in a camper. I should set the scene for you though. Palmetto Island wasn't really an island in the traditional sense. It was completely surrounded by palm trees and vegetation, except for the road in and out. There were roads in the resort, but they were only for golf carts and other small vehicles. The whole place was also dense with palm trees and vegetation. If you weren't on the road, in a campsite, or at one of the recreational areas, you would be in a forest. We, as in my family, were all hanging out at one of the playgrounds. I had made a new friend who I was playing with. At some point the rest of my family had left me to play with my new friend, until eventually he left too. I was there alone, and the sun began to set. This wasn't the first time we'd been to Palmetto Island, and I had at the time known it pretty well. I had assumed that the walk back to our campground would be short. However, at some point, I got turned around and ended up in the area where you would launch boats into the water to go fishing. There was a group of people there, and I asked them for directions. Now, I wasn't completely brain dead, so I lied and said the number of our campsite was 10 sites down from our actual one. They pointed me in the right direction, and I began to walk. Now, I hadn't known this at the time, but my family had realized I was no longer at the playground and started driving around in our golf cart and another one they had rented. If they hadn't, I probably wouldn't be telling this story. As I'm walking towards our campsite, a car pulls up beside me, and one of the people I had asked for directions rolls down the window. Keep in mind I had been walking for about an hour or two in total. He offers me a ride and tells me to ride in the front seat. Me, tired and weary from walking, accepts and gets into the car. I now know that this is something you should never do. We're driving in the right direction until he passes up the entrance to the campsites, at which point I knew something was wrong. I tell him he passed it up, but he doesn't reply. By some stroke of divine luck, I see my dad in a golf cart driving in the opposite direction at us, and I start yelling and waving at him. He pulls up in front of the car and stops, and so does the guy driving. I use the manual unlock in the car door, and run to my dad, who has his concealed carry drawn on the guy as soon as I'm out of the way. He calls the police and holds the guy at gunpoint until they get there and arrest him. I'm only telling this story now because I found out last week that the guy and his whole family had done this before, and they had gotten away with it. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had my dad not showed up when he did. I was driving from Atlanta, Georgia to Lexington, South Carolina with my girlfriend to visit parents. I like to drive at night since there are less people on the road and I can take my time. At around 3 a.m. or so, we're making good time. I had stopped at a gas station and picked up some coffee for us, and we were due in about an hour. My girlfriend was sleeping soundly, and I'm listening to a quiet radio humming away. I start getting a little drowsy and take a sip. The road had no cars in sight except for a few spotted on the side of the road here and there. In the distance I can make out what looks like a hitchhiker, or what I think is one, but I can't really tell due to such low light. As I get closer, I start to notice other things, like how the person is kinda thin and tall, and completely, for the most part, apparently brown. I'm right on this thing now, and about 20 feet from it, it turns around and locks eyes with me as I pass by. This was no person. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. It was a deer, or I tell myself it was. I've seen deer stand on their hind legs to fight, but they still have deer posture when they do so. Not only that, but I was watching this thing walk for about 30 seconds from first seeing it in the distance to passing it. The posture it had was human, standard biped stance, arms back, chin down. But the worst part were the eyes, or lack thereof, as in place were two large black pits, almost black hole-ish. I'll never forget the stare down it gave me. The instant I passed it, I had the only panic attack I've ever had in my life. I had to wake up my girlfriend to keep me calm enough to get to an exit, with a large gas station a few miles away. Like hell I was going to use an off-ramp, that close to that thing. After we pulled into the gas station, I had a complete meltdown and cried harder than I ever thought I could. I couldn't talk, breathe, or do anything but want to curl into a ball and cry. After around 30 minutes or so, she finally gets me to calm down enough to tell her what happened. While I don't think she believed what I think I saw, she knew that I was convinced and legitimately scared to death. Every once in a blue moon I'll dream about it and wake up crying or in a cold sweat, and she will tease me about it or roll over and ignore me instead of comforting me about the one thing that I've ever been terrified of. But I know what I saw, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life.
This terrifying account comes from the journals of Robert Dale Owens, who swore truth by it, and it's one of the eeriest sea legends ever recorded. In 1828, Robert Bruce, a rugged first mate from Torbay, England, was aboard a merchant ship heading west across the Atlantic. The crew had been at sea for nearly 6 weeks, and the air had grown sharp and cold as they approached the icy waters near Newfoundland. At noon one bleak day, Bruce and the captain took their sun measurements and descended into the cramped, breaking belly of the ship to calculate their position. The captain vanished into his cabin, while Bruce, hunched over a desk in his tiny stateroom, focused on his logroom. Frustrated by a miscalculation, Bruce called out, "I've got our longitude and latitude. Does this match yours?" He called out again but received no answer. Turning his head slightly, Bruce saw who he assumed to be the captain sitting at the main desk in the adjacent cabin. But as he glanced, his breath caught in his throat. The man wasn't the captain. He wasn't anyone Bruce had ever seen. The stranger sat perfectly still in the captain's chair, calmly scribbling on a slate with his head slightly tilted down. Then, without a word, he slowly raised his eyes and stared directly into Bruce's. His expression was blank. Bruce felt a chill seize his entire body, and he backed away in a panic as he bolted up the stairs, slamming into daylight. The crew turned to stare as he emerged, pale and shaken, and the captain rushed over and asked what happened. "There's someone down there in your chair, a man I've never seen." "Bruce, that's impossible." But determined to prove it, they stormed back into the cabin together, which was empty, and every door remained locked, and after a complete search there was no trace of the person. Then Bruce spotted the slate on the desk, and clearly written in chilling block letters were the following words: "Steer to the northwest." The captain demanded every crew write a phase for comparison, but none matched the eerie, unnatural handwriting. Uneasy but unable to explain it, the captain ordered a course and changed towards the northwest. Hours later, the lookout screamed iceberg and a ship. They spotted a frozen, shattered wreck lodged in the ice. It was a Quebec ship bound for Liverpool, trapped for weeks. Her passengers were half dead, starving, frozen, and hopeless. As the rescue began, Bruce froze midship. One of the survivors climbing aboard was him, the man from the captain's chair. The same face, the same stare, and Bruce felt the blood drain from his body. Later, the captain handed the man the slate. "Write something for me, anything. How about steer to the northwest?" The man complied, smiling nervously. Then the captain turned the slate over. "Did you write this too?" The man stared at the ghostly message. "That's not mine, I only wrote on one side." "You sure?" "Yeah, what the hell is this?" Bruce stepped forward, voice shaking. "I saw you hours ago on the ship, sitting right there, writing that exact thing." The man turned white. He admitted he had fallen into a dreamlike sleep aboard the ice-locked ship, around the time that Bruce had seen the apparition. In his dream, he'd been on another ship. This one, he even described its layout perfectly before ever setting foot on it. The man had woken suddenly and told the others that help was coming. They thought he was delirious. But the writing on the slate, the course correction, had saved them all. No one ever figured out how the stranger's face appeared to be Bruce, or how the message ended upon the slate. Neither Bruce nor the man ever fully recovered from what they experienced, and to this day sailors will sometimes share the story of what happened.
This was told to me by my dad when I was 12. Even now, when I ask him about the story, he can remember every vivid detail like it just happened last week. And when he was just a rookie, he had to conduct nighttime roadblocks meant to catch drunk drivers. They had done it many times before, and this night started routine enough for them. That was until this Toyota Corolla drove up to them with what looked like a white blanket on its roof, flapping in the wind. They thought it was weird, but did not see anything amiss about it. One of them even joked that this guy was multitasking by drying his laundry and driving home at the same time. The laughs stopped when the lone car came closer, and all of them saw what looked like a woman in white lying face down on top of the car. The woman seemed to slide like a slug backwards until she disappeared behind the car, as it eventually came to a stop in front of them. It took a few minutes for my dad's team to recompose themselves as they stared at each other, as if to say, "You guys saw that, right?" The most senior of them finally stepped up and shot the unusual question to the driver. There was a noticeable quiver in his voice as he made conversation and asked for him to step out the vehicle. My dad's team inspected the whole vehicle, including the boot, and found nothing strange in it. The driver was a good-looking staff sergeant in the army who was heading home from a company event earlier that night and admitted to having a few cans of beer. He said he laid down to sleep in his bunk to sleep it off, hence why he was driving home at 4 a.m. He passed their sobriety test, and they started to ask him if he saw anything strange during his drive. Initially he said no, but after more questioning he mentioned that he had to swerve to avoid what looked like a bird that was flying upside down. It was spooky, but he didn't think that it was a detail worth sharing with police officers. The senior then told the guy to chill out at a 24-hour coffee shop before heading home, as the locals believe that if a malevolent spirit follows you, making a pit stop confuses them so they can't set up shop in your house. After some confusion of his own, the driver finally caught on and nodded in agreement. After the guy left, they called into the station and cut the night short. We never knew what happened to that driver. I hope he's alright. This is an experience I had when I stayed with my family in a guest house way out in the mountains. My daughter was quite young when this happened. I think she was about 4. My husband and I had thought that we had put her down for the night and she was asleep, but we were wrong. We were in the living room area of the guest house, and I guess that was just after midnight, when our daughter came rushing out of her bedroom over to us. "What's wrong? Do you need the bathroom?" I asked. She shook her head. I remember she looked a little shaken up. It was a rare look for a girl her age. She then said, "No, Mummy. The lady outside said, 'Can you let me in? But I can't reach the lock on the window. Can you do it for me?'" I sat there staring at her, completely unable to understand what she had just said. We were, literally, in the middle of nowhere. We drove miles and miles to get to this log cabin, and there wasn't another residence anywhere nearby. I didn't know how to approach this topic with my daughter. I didn't want to call her a liar for having a bad dream, so before my husband could open his mouth, I simply asked, "Who said that to you, darling?" As soon as the words left my mouth, concern inside me began to flower and bloom. My question to my daughter boomed repeatedly in my head. "Who said that to you?" My daughter seemed to sense my distress, and I will be honest with you, I don't think I hid my concern very well. I must have looked racked with emotion. "The lady with the hurt head outside the window, she was banging and banging on the glass, Mama." I shot a glance over to my husband, and we jumped to our feet and marched straight into the room that my daughter was sleeping in. I went to turn the light on, but my husband stopped me. He said if there was someone out there, then we would be able to see them outside if the light was off. I saw something against the window, I know I did. There was this white shadow, like a mist or smoke. It looked like the rough outline of a person, and then it was gone. It dissipated. My husband asked us to wait inside with the door locked while he went out to check the situation. My daughter then said, "The lady was sad, Mama. She looked so hurt, and it looked like she had horns too." I was frightened, very frightened at the idea that there might be someone out there trying to persuade my child to let them in, and equally frightened that I might have just encountered something supernatural. My husband returned from checking outside. He didn't see anyone out there or footprints either. I mean, there is gravel around the whole building. Surely we would have heard them run off, right? But we didn't. I went by the door while he was standing there and held my daughter's hand tightly as I approached. The door was open and my husband went to close it, but I stopped him. I wanted one good look out there. All I could see was a dark sea of trees. The tree line was about 20 feet from the cabin, and all I could think was that the tree line could be hiding something. The bugs chirped and the wind blew, and it was at that point I shut the door. If someone needed help, like my daughter said, surely they would come back when the door was wide open. We all slept in the same bed that night, and thankfully nothing else suspicious happened after that. I will say that I was completely on edge until we left that cabin. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I wonder who the hurt-horned lady was, and why she wanted my daughter to let her in. I'm about to share with you the single most terrifying moment of my life. I have a cousin that lives in a secluded area where everyone owns land. He has something like 600 acres of land where he lets his cattle run free. And I went to visit him one summer, and he came up with the idea of camping out. He has a little spot where there is a teepee in a clearing underneath a few large trees. The walking path goes straight through the clearing down a little trail to a pond that then goes back to some trees. To get to this place, we drove his truck through his pasture and up to a tree line. We had to get out and walk a ways into the trees to get there. Thinking back on it, I can't really remember how far into the tree line his camping site was, but it was a little bit of a walk. So my cousin, his girlfriend, and a friend she brought and myself start to drink and had a small campfire going. Someone threw a little too much brush on the fire and it got pretty big, to the point that it lit some of the branches of the trees above on fire. At that moment it was kind of scary, thinking that we had almost started a huge fire, but it grew and died pretty quickly. Now later on in the night we were all drinking, and I'm tending to the fire. The girlfriend says out loud that she needs to use the restroom, and I thought that she went down to the path near the pond. The fire is starting to die down, and I need to gather some more brush, so I start walking towards the path to the pond. As I'm walking down the path, I see a shadow of someone holding a tree branch up, seemingly looking back at me. Remembering that the girlfriend has announced she needs to use the restroom, I assume it's her, so I call out her name. As soon as I do, the shadow drops the branch and I can no longer see it. At that same moment, I hear my girlfriend shout back at me from the campsite. I look back, and from a distance I could see her coming out of the teepee. I look back at the brush and see nothing. I stare for a moment, but there was no movement. Completely shocked and confused, I start to walk back to the camp, heart already racing so fast I thought I may pass out. When I walk up to the camp, I see that all of us are there. I tell him what just happened and everyone is a little spooked. My cousin brushes it off, saying that we were out on his land and there's no way anyone could be here. We eventually kept drinking, but I can't forget about it. Much later on, I'm getting a little tired, and my cousin is just looking to fool around with his girlfriend, so we all lay down in the teepee. I'm laying next to the friend, just trying to pass out, while I can hear them fooling around. They are all talking and whispering when I hear the running thud of footsteps outside of the tent, as if something is running at the tent, then kind of hear a pop and drag, like someone hit the tent and drug against it. My cousin leaps out yelling, and now we're all terrified. He's shouting that we need to get out of there now, and we all left everything and ran to his truck. We drove back to his house scared crapless, talking about what just happened and what we saw earlier. As we were all talking about it, we all agreed that the thud sounded like it had 2 feet, and you could hear a difference in deers or horses galloping. They were big thuds, as if carrying a lot of weight. My cousin said he was laying near the edge of the teepee when he heard the steps and looked up to see something hit and drag something across the fabric right in front of him. The fact that he was actually scared is what made it even more frightening, as he had lived on that land his whole life and had been to that campsite so many times. To start off this story, I need to give you a little insight about myself. I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. On this particular hot summer weekend, my friends and I, including my boyfriend Tony and my older brother Brad, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend, as it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we really didn't think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teens. And after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had bought tons of alcohol and weed for us to have at the weekend, so we wouldn't be bored as we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around midnight, it was pitch black, and we had this huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony, and as we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted that we didn't notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes into one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all quite intoxicated and high at the time. Eventually our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. He asked Brad how he was, but Brad didn't reply or make any indication that he had heard him. After that, me and my 2 girlfriends began to get scared as well. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first one to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods, and I turned my head and followed his gaze as best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was looking at, my heart dropped. Right there was a dog. At least that's what I thought. It was some person's dog that wandered off. But then my brain kicked in, and I realized that there weren't neighbors for many miles. It was very unlikely for there to be a dog. My mind began to race, while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak or even move. In one motion, this thing got off its 4 legs and stood up on 2. That was not something we were expecting. And when it did so, it was gigantic. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. I kid you not. The other 2 girls and the other boy with us audibly gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was as still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like hours, but was probably mere seconds. Tony was the first to talk. "Doesn't have a tail." No one heard what he said but Brad, and I swear to you, when I say his eyes were as big as saucepans. That freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls asked. "It has no tail." My heart stopped beating. He was right. It didn't have a tail. Suddenly, my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. Now I understood why my brother was basically crapping himself. Could it be a skinwalker? My instincts kicked in right there. But before I could nope out of there, the thing let off a terrible stench like rotting meat. The sound was enough to scare the hell out of everyone. My brother, who was the first up out of his chair, and started shouting native words to the creature when I told him to just get the hell inside. No one questioned me when they saw how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He's never seen me so scared, so he knew we were in a bad situation. We all fled from the cabin, with my brother in tow, shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay, giving us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off and grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counter and started throwing it at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had freaked everyone out, and we were all in tears. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. Many of us were in shock. He grabbed my dad's pistol and was holding onto it for hours. We must have all eventually fallen asleep, and we were all very shaken up. I awoke to my brother packing all our stuff into the 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back, and maybe not alone. Before we did, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up, and to this day we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night, and they don't bother asking us either.
Back in 2015, I was living on Orcas Island, Washington, a stunning but isolated place in the Salish Sea, northwest of Seattle. In the heart of the island, hidden beneath a dense canopy of fir and cedar, lies Cascade Lake, a deep, glassy body of water that seems to swallow the sky when the sun dips below the trees. My friends and I had spent the summer jumping off cliffs, swimming in the bottomless depths and lounging on its shores, unaware of just how much we didn't know about the place. We were fooling around on the wooden bridge over the lake, the sun barely a sliver on the horizon.
There was a little fish, aggressive and frantic, that kept swarming and nipping at us, like we were invading something we shouldn't. That's when my dog Duke did something to make my stomach turn. We had moved onto some rocks at the shoreline, but Duke had stayed back at the bridge. He saw where we'd gone and then just launched himself into the lake, churning the water so violently it almost looked like he was running across the surface. And this is a dog who hated getting wet. Yet he was swimming as if something were chasing him, as if something were down there beneath him rising. When he finally pulled himself onto the rocks, he was shaking, not from cold, but from fear. A friend pointed out a strange, gnarled root ball sticking out further down the shoreline. He commented that it looked like a dragon head. I walked closer, stepping carefully along the uneven rocks. And sure enough, the way the roots twisted, it did look like a dragon, horns and a long snout, with deep grooves that could have been ancient eyes. I was about to turn away when I felt something. A primal, stomach-sinking sensation like something had just locked its gaze on me. I turned around. 5 feet from me, floating in the water, was a log that hadn't been there before. Only, it wasn't a log. It was alive. Its surface was slick, covered in dark moss that made it blend into the water. But as I stared, the illusion broke. Beneath the disguise, I saw a long, scaly snout, reptilian eyes, something like ears or fins pressed back against the skull, and it was studying me. For one horrifying moment, neither of us moved. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. Then Duke and Cookie saw it. They exploded into frantic barking, charging the water, their bodies tensed in pure terror. But the thing didn't flinch. It was still. I don't remember backing away. I just remember running, my dogs at my heels, breath tearing through my lungs. When we got back, it was gone. The next day, I asked an old friend from Bellingham if he'd ever heard of water dragons. As a joke, I thought it was just superstition. He didn't even hesitate. He said, dead serious, we had to tie up goats near the lake to keep them away. I laughed, and he didn't. Then I remembered something else. In the years before this happened, 2014, a man had been found dead near those same rocks, alone in his tent, covered in bite marks. The official explanation? Otters. There are no natural predators on Orcas Islands, no wolves, no bears, just the water, and what's beneath it. Months later, my then girlfriend, who had grown up on the island, told me something offhandedly. One day while driving past Cascade Lake, she saw it too. A long, black shape, gliding silently beneath the surface. There are rumors that these lakes connect to the sea through underground tunnels, and they're deep, deeper than anyone knows, and that sometimes something moves through them. I never swam in Cascade Lake again.
Me and my colleague, who joins me in the car halfway there, meet police outside the outskirts of town. It was fairly obvious that the house was run down and practically grey due to age, but if you focus enough you could see that it was yellow as the actual house colour. It didn't help though that it was 8 in the morning in December in Sweden. Saying, for those of you who don't know, it's pitch black with knee-high snow. The entrance was weirdly enough in the back of the house. It had a small stairway, so there was difficulty in bringing the stretcher in. We walk up the stairs and see an obvious break-in attempt. Broken glass, window off the door, like someone grabbed the handle from the inside. The police say it was an anonymous call about the place, so it might have been a burglar or an uninvited family member. Police say the family had practically no connection to the woman anymore. So we walk in, and we're met by a heavy stench. So we walk back to the car to gear up for any other action needed. We walk in again, and now we notice there are several padlocks on each door in the narrow hallway, and tape to seal it further. Most shocking to me was that the bathroom door was straight ahead of us. It had 2 padlocks and full silicone sealing along the cracks. This is where we met the stench again, through our masks. To the right was the living room where we walked in, and she was there, laying in front of the couch, another 4 padlocks on the balcony door. She lay on her side with an electrical heater in the way, and of course close to her face, and what could only look like a blanket on top of her. Upon further inspection, her face was gone, surrealistic, dried, moving, worms, holes. We lifted her blanket off the body, which apparently was a picnic blanket, the kind where there is isolation and plastic underneath and fleece on top. When this was moved, it looked like a drowning accident. Blue and green bloating, and various liquids. The only option here was a body bag. Grabbing her wrists was like sinking your hands into putty. The worms falling out what would have been the mouths and eyes, and seeing them crawl away in search of new feeding grounds. The body bag did not hold the moist stench that filled our lungs, and later on that day we prepared the body as well we could, seeing the rotting. There was no possibilities in embalming. We figured that she'd been in the living room for over a month. We brushed a special bacterial killing fluid over her. That's all we could really do besides removing as much of the worms as we could. They had made it to the lungs, going to the heart. When we had the casket ready, and her in a body bag in it, we had to prep it with 2 kinds of bacterial killing powders and 3 kinds of spray that kill any kind of smell or rot, and it worked for a whole 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, the funeral finally took place, and the body can only be assumed to be practically one big blob by now. The body had been soaked up into the wood, making it appear like driftwood. This meant that she had been seeping out through the body bag. The family came along into the church, and only 15 others. They asked about the minor smell like someone had farted, but for us it was obvious that this was not going to be pleasant. Half hour in, and the whole church was filled with the smell. Another half hour goes by and 3 people leave early. When the ceremony was done, they came with a complaint about the smell, and they were going to ask about it in the gathering reception after the funeral. We didn't have the stomach to tell them that they most likely didn't have a body in there anymore. It's one incident I will never forget. My fire department was called out for a search on a missing person. He was supposed to report back to prison on a work release on Wednesday. We were dispatched on Saturday after he was reported as a no-show, when someone found his car on a back road. We assumed he had parked there, then called someone to pick him up. Okay, a few hours of wandering in the woods, we won't find anything and we'll go home. But after 35 minutes, we found him. He's maybe 50 yards off the gas pipeline easement, just standing there facing away. You'd think he was taking a leak, until you see the rope. He had taken his life in the worst way. The tree he'd attached the rope to wasn't strong enough, so he didn't break his neck. His feet were on the ground. He strangled himself. Probably took a while. He stood there, deceased, for 3 days. We held his body as our captain climbed the tree to cut the rope. We wrapped him in a tarp and carried him nearly a mile through the woods back to his car. We sat there for 2 hours while the forensic team surveyed the site and the car. I was a volunteer firefighter for 17 years. The guy is the one that still appears in my dreams. 14 years later, as I walk up the gas line trail, I always see him standing there. I worked as an agency nurse in a small county hospital for a while. We got a call from a nursing home saying that one of their patients was going downhill. We went through all the motions, got the ER bed ready, MD was also waiting, EMTs pull up, and they're actively doing chest compressions. The paramedic is breathing for him with an ambu bag, or bag valve mask. The MD asks why he hasn't been intubated, as the drive was half hour away from the nursing home to the hospital. The paramedic just said, "You can try if you want, I can't move his head." The MD asks me to get a rolled up blanket to place under his shoulder. It makes it to where the doc can see the vocal cords so he can intubate the patient, for all you non-medical professionals hearing this. I place the blanket under his shoulder and his head is floating off the stretcher, like he's doing a crunch or something. I applied pressure to his forehead to push his head down, but it didn't budge. I pushed hard enough to the point where I thought any harder I'm going to snap this guy's neck. Keep in mind he's flatlined this whole time and we're continuing to give him breaths with the ambu bag in between all of this, but he's basically gone. The doc gets up and pushes on his head and snap. The head goes limp. The doc pronounces time of death, and I'll never forget the sound. It was actually very close to the noise you hear in movies when someone breaks someone else's neck. The doc ordered an x-ray after it was all said and done, and his neck snapped at C45, a clean break. We called the nursing home to let them know he had passed, and I asked the nurse to read me off his story. He had ankylosing spondylitis combined with a stroke. He didn't move or get out of bed. Laying still without movement for such a long period of time removed the flexibility in his neck and caused his cervical spine to basically fuse. When we applied pressure to his forehead, we snapped his neck. It was the worst feeling ever, when you do more harm than good. I heard this from a close friend of mine. He is an avid hiker and loves the outdoor life, and we often go mountain climbing and camping together. I will switch into first person and tell you about his experience as if it were my own. I had wanted to climb a very snowy mountain in my region in a party of 5. We researched the climb and figured it would take us 3 days and 2 nights to get to the summit and back down. The first day of the climb was difficult, the temperature was below freezing and the terrain was very rocky. We ended up expending a lot of our energy. It got dark at 4 p.m. that day, making progress difficult, and we pushed on through and managed to set up base camp, and we pitched our tents. We made it to a flat area which was kind of like a field, with fresh covered snow covering everything, and all we could see was black and white, and the sky was being black, and the ground snow white. It didn't take me too long to drop off to sleep, despite the fact I was shivering in my sleeping bag. I did, however, wake up in the middle of the night and heard a voice outside my tent. I was groggy, and I almost thought it was morning, but I couldn't see any light. I thought it could just have been one of the people I was hiking with. I lay there, static in the dark, trying to get back to sleep, and then I heard the voice again. Hey, hey. I was very confused at that point because to me that voice didn't sound like it belonged to anyone in our group, and there was just another off-putting thing. The voice sounded like it was coming from the direction we had just climbed up. The voice was coming from the descent, if you know what I mean. I checked my watch and it was past 2 a.m. I wondered if someone had been injured, another hiker perhaps, so I woke up our whole party, we lit our lanterns and turned on our flashlights, and we called out in the direction we heard the voice from. Anyone out there? Are you hurt? We called out, but the only response we received was the howl of the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle sound of snowfall. It was as if, the moment I had called out, the voice had stopped calling. I didn't hear it again that night, but it played on my mind, and I slept very lightly, as if there was an ever-tightening knot of concern in my stomach. It was weird, but we had to move on. I supposed I must have been hearing things. You can hear all sorts of strange noises out in the wild. It could have been anything. Well, that was what I thought at the time. That's what I tried to convince myself of. However, I knew deep down it sounded way too human for me to mistake it as an animal. The following day we continued our climb and covered a lot of ground. We crossed several peaks and pitched our tents again when the sun began to descend. We were in a prime position to aim for the summit in the morning. I got myself ready for sleep, hoping to catch a few extra hours which I missed out on the night before. I ended up waking up again though. This time it was because I needed to take a whiz. I got up and headed out of the tent into the freezing cold to find a place to relieve myself. It was pitch black, but the blanket of snow at my feet allowed me to at least see where I was going. The moon was pretty full and it was just jutting out from behind the summit of a mountain. I stopped to look at it, and it was then
that I noticed something. I tried my best to get a good look, but it was difficult. The snow was obscuring my view, but there was definitely something out there near the summit. It looked like there was a light, flickering in the distance, maybe the light of a lantern or a fire. I decided to call out and shouted, "Hey!" The light then disappeared, as if in reaction. But then something different happened. I heard voices coming from that direction, their calls carried on the wind. "Hey, hey!" I shouted back. "Hey, you okay? Do you need any help? Is anyone out there?" I did so because it sounded like the same voice I'd heard the night before. The voice never answered. I couldn't consider it a coincidence anymore. All I could do was head back to my tent and get back into my sleeping bag. Something was trying to call me, I know it was. It was trying to separate me from my party. The mountains are scary, but thankfully nothing much else happened. We climbed the summit and made it back down without any further issue. While I was up there, I did look for any signs of fires or lanterns, but couldn't find anything. I do wonder what was calling me though, and what might have happened if I went in search of the owner of that voice. It was early spring of 2016. I had just turned 24 years old. My friend and I just reached our main spot to camp, Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds, just outside of Payson, Arizona. We'd usually travel out here 2 or 3 times each year. It has some incredible views and is only a couple of hours away from the city. For the most part, this area was pretty secluded. A privately owned convenience store rested a few miles away, with a small town 20 miles before that. The entrance was on a dirt road directly off the highway, with a campground sign at the start of the road, marking local wildlife, any fire hazards, and general news relevant to camping folk. The path is mostly linear, with maybe one fork spanning several miles. We once traveled down the dirt road to see how far it would take us. One of the paths would take you to another highway entrance, with a ranger's tower halfway there. The other path led to a dead end. An abandoned cabin can be found on this path a few miles in, mostly hidden off in the distance behind some larger foliage. The snow had mostly cleared up at this point, leaving for crisp air, a slight chill, and fauna becoming active again. We'd usually spot some wild horses, several deer, and tons of little critters whenever we'd come out this way. It really was the perfect time of year for a relaxing trip to get away from the city for a few days. We got in at around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was late for us, and we'd usually try to make it out of there by noon at latest. This trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work during the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was setting fast, and we still hadn't picked our camping spot. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families parked somewhat close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards away from the highway. This time around, we just wanted to get away from the humans for a while. Customer service jobs will do that to you. We drove down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally picked the perfect area. A small clearing just hanging off the edge of a hill. The whole valley could be seen from this area, with a beautiful sunset. This would have been our main spot from then on, if the next night's incident never occurred, that is. We agreed to get a campfire going, and we would just avoid building a tent on this trip. We didn't have much time to do so anyway, and her car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat, and she'd take the passenger seat with the window slightly ajar. We'd have a few blankets for each of us and would fall into that unrivaled slumber. The next day went fairly uneventful. We just decompressed, and I had this strange feeling throughout the day, like we were being watched. There were crunching of leaves just out of sight every few hours, but I figured it was just the local wildlife doing their thing. My friend didn't notice anything unusual, so I didn't dwell on it. Night came, and the feeling still hadn't gone away. My friend must have felt something she didn't vocalize though, as she took some of her sleeping pills. She didn't usually need to take them on our camping trips. The nature's ambience was enough to put anyone to sleep, I thought. It was nearing 1 a.m. My friend dozed off in the passenger seat while I attempted to wind down in the back. I leaned against the side window behind the passenger seat, legs outstretched to the car's back door. The window opposite of me was rolled down slightly, with a cold breeze flowing in. I had been on my phone scrolling through Facebook when I heard something outside. A few crunches of the fallen leaves, several paces outside the car. I whispered to my friend, "Did you hear that?" But she was already out. I put my phone down and listened intently for a minute or two, but then heard nothing. Must have been a small animal curious about the camp. I retreated back to my phone, scrolling through social media. About 10 minutes had passed when I heard it again, that definitive crunch right outside the door. I lowered the phone. My eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the phone into the deep darkness of the wood, and as I turned the phone away from me, the backlight illuminated the window above my feet. To this day, I can't get the image out of my head. 2 dirty, scabbed hands held onto the window, the fingers wrapped inside the car. The nails were long, unkempt, and dark. Behind the window, a silhouette of a face was pressed up against it. The breath would create condensation every few seconds, and all I could make out were the reflections of those empty, black eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It felt like eternity. The staring contest between this thing and me. Thoughts were repeating incessantly in my head. Why haven't they ran if they noticed I saw them? What were they planning? Is this the face of death? After probably 10 seconds of not doing anything, the hands slowly unclenched the window and receded into the darkness. The condensation on the window dispersed, and another few seconds passed before I heard the dreaded crunch, crunch, melodically fading into the distance. I still just sat there. What on earth had just happened? Why didn't I do anything? Why am I still not doing anything? With that thought, my body shot into adrenaline. I pounded on my friend's seat, waking her up from her slumber in a dizzy confusion. I unlatched and kicked open the back door and took a moment to scan the area. Whoever they were, whatever it was gone. I scrambled to pick up any important camping supplies we left outside and cramped everything into the back seat and trunk, periodically looking over my shoulder and listening for those 2 footsteps. I slammed the back door shut, and there they were, a grim reminder of the horror that had just happened. 2 handprints imprinted on the window. I quickly wiped them off the window in a panic, a reaction to erase the events, I guess. I jumped into the front seat, started the car, and floored it out of there. My friend, finally coming to, asked me what the hell I'm doing. I just screamed, "We gotta go, there's someone out there." I didn't see whoever or whatever it was fleeing the scene, speeding down the dirt road. My friend insisted I slow down, and eventually I did. We reached the highway, and I proceeded to drive 20 or so miles before we reached a Denny's, where my friend asked for us to stop and eat to explain everything. The nightmare subsided a few months later. My embarrassment continues to this day for the state of shock I was in at the time. Everyone says you have a fight or flight instinct, and I'm confused whether I have either. I mean, I just sat there and did nothing. I frequently tend to ask myself who was out there. Another camper messing with us? A resident of the abandoned cabin down the dirt road? Or maybe something more paranormal residing in the forest watching lone, vulnerable campers as they drift off to dreamland. We'd still go camping there in the years ahead, but never too far from the highway. Whatever it was, I hope I've seen the last of it. I haven't really shared this story with many people, but I thought it might be time. This happened back in the 90s. I was driving from Ohio to California and stopped finally for some sleep at a rest stop in Flagstaff, Arizona. I am known to drive long distances with little sleep, and woke up and headed to California. It was early in the morning, around 4 a.m. California time, and I was between Needles and Barstow, out in the middle of nowhere in the Mojave Desert. And that's when I saw what I swear to this day was a huge wolf the size of a person run across the road in front of me. It was on all fours, and the back of it was above the hood of my car easily, a Chevy Cavalier, and roughly 12 feet ahead of me. I hit the brakes lightly, as I was the only car around at the time, and it went from north to south. Over 20 years ago, and still clear as day, though it was dark. Now I've seen coyotes and lived in the desert for some time, and have never seen anything like this before or since. It was grey in colour, mostly, and resembled a werewolf in size, but I don't believe in those generally speaking. And out of all my 20+ trips, I've seen snowstorms, tornadoes, dust storms, and other things I'll never forget. But this is one of those things. Anyone out in that area ever seen anything like this? It still drives me crazy trying to figure out what the hell it was, and I do speculate often enough about it.
This story takes place back in 2013. This all happened in Mastic Beach, which is in Long Island, New York. Mastic was extremely far from safe. One day in August, I went to Mastic Beach. Now this beach is extremely filthy and has rarely ever been cleaned. It was the closest beach from where we lived. I couldn't go to a beach further because the other closest beach was about a 35-minute drive away, and I had a learner's permit at the time. I really wasn't supposed to be driving alone, but the beach was only 5 minutes away and there were no police in the area. I arrived at the beach. I saw there were no cars in sight, so I took a chair, towel, and handbag out of my car and placed it in the sand. After placing these items down, I walked my way over to the water and put my feet in it. I walked further into the water, and now my knees were in it. I thought about swimming for a second, but I saw the water was murky and had algae in it. So what I did was that I walked out of the water and back to shore. I got on my chair and dried myself off with a towel. I wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon because it was hot out, and it was very sunny. Instead of going back in the water, I decided I wanted to walk along the long beach area. So I proceeded. About 10 minutes into my walk, it started to smell. At first, I figured it was just some trash laying around near me or a dead fish. As I continued to walk forward, the smell kept getting stronger. The whole time walking, I didn't look in any other direction but in front. As I was still walking, looking at only 12 o'clock, I felt my foot hit something hard and hairy. I looked down, and what I saw was the kind of things you read in horror stories. Right below me was the lifeless head of an old woman. Her eyes and mouth were open wider than humanly possible. I saw this and I screamed like a little girl and ran so fast like I was on steroids. When I got back to my chair, I threw up immediately from running so fast, from the gut-wrenching sight that I saw. I got my phone from my bag and called the police, then connected to a 911 dispatcher and told her everything she had to know. She then told me to stay put, as the police would be on their way. When the police arrived, I told them where the dead body was. They thanked me and told me to go home because they were going to shut down the beach as it was under investigation. I would say an estimate of 3 weeks had passed when one morning I turned on the news, like I would do every morning, and I saw that the dead woman had finally been identified. Her name was Diane Ross. She was 63. It was also revealed that the cause of her death was murder and she was stabbed in the back of her neck. I was in disbelief. They were never able to trace any DNA prints to who killed her, and the killer
had never been caught, which is the scariest part of this. As of today, I never went back to that beach and never will. I also moved to a different and more wealthy town in Long Island that is far safer, where the crime rate is very low. And although this was 11 years ago, it still feels like yesterday, as time flies by fast.
My brother shared this story with me. He's an EMT. The patient in question is an obese male in excess of 500 pounds and is unable to lift himself from the couch. He has been in that state for several weeks when they attempt to remove him from said couch. A massive chunk of flesh begins to peel away from the body, exposing his muscle and vertebrae. The patient loses consciousness. Unable to remove the man from the couch without killing him, they attempt to keep him alive while he is still attached to the couch. The fire department is called, and they cut the couch away, and are hopeful to get him to the hospital intact. Fast forward to the ER, the surgeon concluded that there was no way to remove him from the couch and save his life. Attempting to remove the couch would expose too much of his body to the outside. That is if he could survive the surgery. He would not survive the following infections. So, he subsequently passed. My second story is an ambulance was called for a homeless man who complained of severe foot pain. Upon trying to inspect the foot, it comes off. It pulls away like an apple plucked from a tree, revealing the man's leg bones and a horrendous infection. He would survive, but not until his leg had been amputated mid-thigh. I'm what they call a crime scene cleaner. Technically, we are biohazard remediation and forensic cleaners. We clean up blood, body fluids, and infectious materials you don't want hanging around. The worst mess I had to clean up was a man who murdered his wife and 2 infant children, and then turned the gun onto himself. Rumor was he was having financial difficulty and about to lose a really top-paying job. He was also used to providing the good life for his family and was very ashamed. A week before he committed his gruesome acts, he was actually diagnosed with severe depression, but refused to seek help for it. I went to the children's bedroom and saw little bloody handprints on the walls. I went home and couldn't sleep that night. I didn't dare tell my wife. It was a really sad story. Sometimes the less you know about a case, the better. I grew up in an old Victorian-era boarding house. Everything about that town, that house, and its surrounding area is just creepy. We saw and felt all kinds of weirdness in there, but that's only the beginning of my experience. Hot spot, cold spots, apparitions of a man who looked like he was dressed in a suit and fedora, who was always with a young woman who was wearing a dress. Like an old school teacher from when the house was used as a boarding house, and the ghosts of the people that had been lynched from an old pecan tree from my backyard. I'm used to seeing some messed up stuff at this point, and that's only one part of it. Fast forward to 2014. I enlisted in the US Navy and got assigned TAD to the USS Sternet in between my A and C schools. I was coming back to the ship one night, and I see someone aloft. That's not right. No one's supposed to be aloft at night, but someone probably got an okay from it somewhere, so whatever. I see them walking around, and then I decide to get the brow and look up, but don't see anyone. Guess they went inside already. I didn't think anything about it. The next morning we go underway. I went up to the smoke deck lake one night on the underway, and while on my way there, I see the upper half of a guy's face, and I could see coveralls with his second-class crows visible through the porthole window on one of the airlock doors that you go through on the outside. I make eye contact and shuffle over to him. He shuffled over too. Okay, I'll open it. Whatever. I open it, look around, and don't see him. He probably went over for another cigarette. I climb up there and I see some people in the dark. Faces occasionally lit by the cherry from their cigarette. But I don't see that specific guy, and I just wanted to make sure he was okay. One guy pipes up, and asks me if I saw him. Yeah, I reply, of course I saw him. Just need to know if there's a man overboard or something. He puffs his cigarette and slowly explains to me that the guy in question is deceased. He's a phantom that still haunts this location after apparently getting into a love triangle and couldn't deal with it and ended up taking his own life via rope. He then goes on to tell me that that isn't even the creepiest part, and that if I get the right permission, I should be able to go down to the skid and see if I see an entity. I agree, go talk to Chief Moon, and she says it's just about fine. When I go down there, I see a guy standing in the corner, back facing the ladder. In the dim light, I asked if he was okay. The eerie sounds from there started to get to me, and I asked again, but he didn't reply. I just booked it. As I was informed by others, it's advisable to never go down there at night. I don't think it was someone just messing with me. For sure, that place was haunted. At the time, I was working as a live-in volunteer EMT at the fire department in my hometown. I lived in Maine, right near the New Hampshire border. It's a beautiful little vacation town. I miss it a lot actually, and visit it often. It's a one-streetlight slow town with more trees than people. A lot of the firefighters in our town were born into it, and I'm no exception. My mother was the emergency services chief, and we are all seasoned EMTs. She was a huge driving force in my life, and she pretty much made me into who I was at the time. A stone, cold, life-saving machine. I thrived on Red Bull and adrenaline. Now that I've got through that little backstory, you can start to understand that I am a rational person, and while I do believe in the supernatural, I'm not one to see a flickering light and cry, "Ghost!" This experience nearly made me quit my lifelong dream and leave the department I literally grew up in. I can't explain it. It was night shift, and I was part of a brand new live-in program to jumpstart our new EMT program. The chief said I was good during the day, but wanted me to have a couple more people with me at night. For the record, I'm non-binary, but at the time I was identifying as female due to paperwork and general confusion in life. So as such, I was accompanied by two of my lifelong friends, big, tall, muscular guys who also didn't scare easy. They also, for the record, did not believe in the paranormal. Tom and Charlie. So there we were in the dispatch room, which is basically where all the radios and security cameras are. There's a crappy old box TV in the corner playing Andy Griffith refunds at 1 a.m. You know, small town stuff. We have a door alarm in the vehicle bay, and when someone walks into the building, it'll chime a loud ding-dong through the whole damn station. Whenever someone leaves through the same door, it chimes a single ding. So imagine our surprise when we heard that telltale ding-dong sound through the building. Now I mean these are loud, you can't miss or mistake them. One of my friends says that it must be the chief checking on us, and I say yeah, she hasn't been sleeping too well. She often liked to make sure we were okay. So we looked up to the monitors and expect to see her walking up the doors. But there was no one. Then another loud ding-dong, and another. Bug must be blocking the sensor, one of them goes. Then it abruptly stopped. We look at each other, door open and called out, "Chief?" No answer. I took a deep breath, grabbed my radio, and told the two guys to watch the monitors, and that if they see anything, to have dispatch send a sheriff our way. They agreed, and I started my sweep. It was just to rule anything out and to be safe. This was during the rise of the drug crisis, and despite being a secure building, drug addicts are crafty, and it's better safe than sorry. I went around and in each fire truck, all good. With each truck I checked, I just felt silly. No one was here, I was just being paranoid. But as I stepped around engine 2, I saw what I swore was the hem of a little girl's dress darting around the forestry. What the hell? Ali? Ali was the fire kid's chief, but her being here in the middle of the night without the chief was strange. Was something wrong? I chased after her, but when I got there, nothing again. I felt dread, raw fear gripping me. My radio started crackling and I checked around me. I looked in every friggin' room for that girl and there was no sign of her, and the more I looked, the louder the static got. Suddenly the static stopped, and a crystal clear girl's voice came through. It said, "You can't save everyone." The guys found me 20 minutes later sitting on the ambulance cot sobbing. I really was that messed up. One of my worst fears as a newbie EMT at the time was triage. For those of you who don't know, triage is when you have multiple patients, you have to decide who gets saved first, and who's basically already dead, and who is okay enough to wait for additional resources. That night, we had 3 separate multi-patient incidents. For many reasons I won't go into detail about them, but I seriously contemplated quitting. I don't know if it was someone messing with me that night over the radio, but I still sometimes have nightmares about that night. I've seen some weird and messed up stuff, but this one is the one that stuck with me the most.
This happened roughly 2 years ago. It was summer and early night, and the only thing that was unexpected that night was the light fall of the rain. I was proud of my car. I used to love taking it out on long drives. I didn't really care where I went as long as there was an open road ahead of me. I liked going out on weekday nights as there was less traffic that way. I loved the mountain roads on the weekdays as they were great for drifting, and I was getting into that. I put a lot of money into my car and it was tuned out to the max. I was with a friend and he was driving too. Before we got anywhere near the mountains, I felt as if something was kind of off. There was a weird vibe, put it down to the unexpected rain in the summer. One of my friends had said that he wanted to go further into the woods that night. I guess I did too, since I was kind of bored of drifting around the same curves. I smiled at the beware of animal signs, thinking that we were invincible. I guess that's how it is when you're young. You just have something about you, don't you? I had seen animals crossing the dark roads at night, so the signs weren't intimidating to me. I saw 3 animals that night actually. Nothing that impressive or frightening. A weasel, a big bird, and a tanuki. One of my friends swore that once he saw an animal with a glowing white body one night. I just laughed it off. I'd never seen anything like that. There were no streetlights in the mountains and there was nothing but darkness. I guess he had just witnessed an optical illusion. We kept on driving. It got later and later. I mean, we always headed out late, but it was almost 3 a.m. and we weren't heading back home. I'd had enough, to be honest, plus I was running low on gas and didn't feel like wasting it driving around and around in the middle of nowhere. I turned around and put my hazards on, and I sent a friend a message to let him know I was leaving. I sat there messing with my phone, expecting my friend to reply. He seemed to be taking his time though. I thought to myself, screw this, I'm tired. I figured my friend would understand if I took off early, and I meant we were in constant communication with each other. I gave him to the end of my smoke. I lit it up, cracked the window a little, and the rainfall on the roof of the car was quite nice. It wasn't heavy, but it was light enough for me to stand out there and smoke a cigarette without it going out. It was at this point I heard a strange noise. There was a faint wailing sound. It was quiet, but it was definitely there. It wasn't as loud as the rain, but I could still hear it all the same. I knew that some animals could make calls that sounded almost human. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but I couldn't. With each passing second, the realization sunk in. It sounded more and more like someone crying. I remember sitting there, the smell of tobacco, the drum of the rain, and the sound of the windscreen wipers going back and forth. I had the key to the ignition in my hand. I wanted to go, but something inside me told me I shouldn't. The sobbing sounded louder. There was something new now, a new sound. I paused the windscreen wipers so that I could listen a little closer, and it sounded as if there was a child wailing. The crying I heard before was undoubtedly the cry of a woman, and now there appeared to be a baby in the mix. The road was slippery, but I felt as if I should pull away. I really, really hated the sound of that sobbing woman, but I knew deep down in my heart there wouldn't be a woman and child out there in the middle of nowhere late at night. I just knew it. So I say this with a clean conscience. I got the hell out of there. It wasn't until about a month later I heard a woman and her son had been taken and their life ended there by her husband, the boy's father. What a dark thing to do. Apparently, their bodies had only just been discovered. It had been out there in the heat of the summer and the cold of the rain and wind for some time. I don't know if it was their residual voices that I heard that night, but all I care about is if their souls are at peace. I spent my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit, North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, I frequently drive up there and hike and camp. This time, I went up with my family in an RV and stayed with them in Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off about 10 miles away at the cold mountain trailhead, and I planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced at hiking or camping, but I have never camped alone. On top of that, I didn't bring a pistol, something I won't go without now. On the way up, the trail was surprisingly strenuous, not necessarily steep. I've hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like tons of up and downs, and feeling like it would never end. Eventually it began to get darker, and I realized we needed to stop and set up while I still had light. So I stopped about half a mile short to the summit, and figured I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot, ate my food, and went into the tent. At this point I realized I hadn't run into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon would be. I have trouble sleeping and usually lay awake for up to an hour trying to sleep. During this, I thought I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the steps. I brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag. That morning, I woke up and ate oatmeal. As I ate, I looked over at my tent and noticed a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries tied with a green cord propped against my tent. Internally, I was pissing myself, but I packed my stuff up and took off within 5 minutes. There was no way I was going to be bothered to go up to the summit now and headed straight down. On my way down, I realized there was a pretty heavy fog and ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I was lost. I used a compass to eventually reorient myself and found the trail again, one of the biggest reliefs I had, and made it out with no incident. However, I come to find out that same morning, a 27-year-old died on the same section of trail as me, and it's possible I would have run into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. His family seems to have scrubbed the internet of several of the articles on him, but the scariest part was knowing that someone knew where I was and watched me, and I had no clue about them. This happened back when I was living in Needville, Texas. I left my mum's house to go feed our dogs that were living at my grandma's house. She had space for them, so they stayed there, and we lived a few miles down the street. This was a little after the 2008 crash, and we had lost our home back in South Carolina like most people had, so we had moved to a smaller rental property in the middle of pretty much nowhere. Needville is a tiny farm town with maybe 300 people at most. Anyway, it was a hot, muggy summer evening, and I headed over to go see my grandma and chit-chat for a bit. I fed the dogs and hung out with my grandma for a few hours. It got dark out, and I decided that I should head back home. So I got back in my car and drove back home. When I started pulling up on my mum's house though, I see a large, squatting shape in the driveway, like a gorilla. I start to enter the driveway slowly, and as soon as my tires hit the gravel, it immediately whips around to face me.
And right there, lit up in my headlights, is this hulking creature, about the same size and build as a gorilla but covered in thick, silver fur. And it had huge, bulbous, ruby-red chitinous eyes and a gruesome snarling mouth full of sharp teeth that looked like they were a good 2 to 3 inches long. It had a small forehead and a round head that was about the same size as a human head, covered in the same thick silver fur. In the moment that it heard my tires hit the gravel, it turned, snarled, and bared its teeth at my car for a brief second, then immediately turned towards the bushes on the other side of the yard and kicked off with its feet, exactly like a gorilla. It looped off into the bushes, alternatively swinging on its hands and landing on its feet, and then vanished. I pulled into my mum's driveway and just waited in the car for a minute to let that thing hopefully run off before I bolted into the house. As soon as the light on the front porch came on and my sister poked her head out to see why I wasn't inside yet, I launched my happy ass right out of the car and full-on sprinted to the door. I didn't see that creature ever again after that, but that didn't stop me from being vigilant for a few months after.
This is my mother's story. I've done my best to adapt her words, though even now, my father refuses to talk about it. He gets visibly uncomfortable if anyone brings it up, his expression tightening, his hands gripping whatever's in front of him like he's bracing for something to return. It happened around 20 years ago. My parents had taken a trip to a tropical beach town, staying at a modest hotel with a small camping area out back. That night the beach wasn't empty. People were scattered along the sand, silhouettes faint in the dim light, talking in low voices, some laughing, some just staring at the sea. My parents sat together, feeling the warm sand beneath them, breathing in the heavy night air. And then it arrived. At first they didn't notice. It had been standing near the water, barely distinguishable from the shadows, but it moved in a way that was wrong. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and wrapped in a long black overcoat that billowed slightly. Despite the absence of wind, the way it walked wasn't smooth. It was stiff and mechanical, as if it wasn't used to the motion. It didn't shuffle through the sand, it glided. My mother nudged my father and they both fell silent, watching it as it approached. It stopped abruptly, as if freezing in place, mere meters away. At that distance they could make out even more details, or rather, lack thereof. The overcoat's collar was high, nearly covering its face. What little was visible was pale and smooth, too smooth, lacking the imperfections of human skin. There were no defining features, no nose, no mouth, just 2 deep-set black eyes. And then it turned its head. Not gradually like a person would, it snapped to the side, its gaze locking onto them with unnatural precision, as though it had just noticed they were watching. My mother felt something tighten in her chest. It was looking at them but not seeing them, not like a person would. It felt like it was reading them, dissecting them. She wanted to speak, to ask who it was, what it was doing there. But before she could, it turned away and slid forwards. Not walked, not ran, slid. The thing didn't seem to touch the ground. It moved with an eerie, fluid speed, gliding towards the water without a single misstep. The coat swayed, but they still couldn't see its feet, if it even had any. And then the same unnatural smoothness. It reached the water's edge and kept going. It didn't wade in, it didn't sink. It floated over the waves, picking up speed, vanishing into the blackness of the ocean. My father, a staunch atheist and skeptic, sat frozen beside my mother. Then something in him snapped. Without thinking, he bolted up and ran after it. My mother shouted for him to stop, panic rising in her throat. She watched as he sprinted towards the shore, chasing after the impossible as if trying to force it to be something real, something rational. But by the time he reached the water, it was gone. He stood there panting, staring into the endless dark. He stayed like that for a long time, fists clenched, shoulders heaving as if waiting for something to come back. Eventually he turned around and walked back, his face ashen, his lips pressed into a tight, colourless line. He never spoke of it again. My mothers looked at the others on the beach, expecting them to be just as shaken. But no one else seemed to notice. The conversations continued, the laughter, the idle chatter. It was as if the thing had only wanted them to see it. And they did. But they never should have.
I was a police officer working the desk from 3 till 11 when a fire alarm signal goes off. Many years ago, the police department offered alarm monitoring services, and we still had about 12 places that were hardwired and would require pulling apart a lot of equipment to disconnect the system, so we just kept it going. The first shift dispatch is already punched in, so she took it. I'm heading out the door to the fire department when I get a 911 call from the same address. I answer it, and there's no one on the other end, and assumed they barely got to the call before passing out. At that moment, I bolt out the back door, hop in the squad car, and radio in the 911 call on the Channel 3 that both police and fire can hear, and that I'm going directly to the house. I arrive just as another unit shows up, but there's no sign of smoke, no sign of anything. An older woman comes walking up the street, pushing a wheelchair, and an elderly lady, her mother. They live there, and just went out for an early evening stroll before dinner. I tell them what we have going on, and they inform me that no one else lives there, and as far as the elderly lady can remember, the alarms were disconnected from the house years ago during some renovations. They didn't have an alarm system either, just a few smoke and fire detectors. We do a walk around the house to get to the back door off the kitchen, and you can clearly see and smell gas. We turned off the gas at the main, set up some fans to air it out, and find the cracked gas liner going to the oven. The daughter said she spilled some coffee she was making for their walk and had to move the oven a few inches to clean it. She probably broke the line, pushing the oven back in. Nothing else in the house was disturbed, and both phones were on the hook. The fire chief shows up about 15 minutes into the call. He goes over to the two ladies and gives them both hugs, and he's nearly in tears. The elderly lady in the wheelchair, you see, her husband was the fire chief 60 plus years ago for our department. The daughter, her husband, passed away a few years ago. He was also a member of our department. I never believed in ghosts and spirits, but that call made me think, maybe people who spend their lives doing good are allowed by some power to look over their loved ones every so often. My partner and I were dispatched to do a welfare check. It was an elderly gentleman that no one had seen in a few days. It was the classic scenario. Mail was overflowing in the mailbox. He had missed a doctor's appointment and his car hadn't been moved. Upon reading that information, we both knew we were about to find a body. We drove there, quite anxious, and when we arrive on the scene, we can't get anyone to open the door. We look through the window and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. Our suspicions confirmed. My partner is a corporal and pulls ranks and makes me go first. The door is unlocked, and as soon as we open it, we smell a mostly fresh, dead body. Almost relieved, we both enter, and he tells me to check vitals on the dead dude. He's obviously dead, with lividity. Dried feces on him, dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath and rolls over and asks why we're in his house. At this point we both started screaming and ran out of the house. We called the emergency services and they transported him and said they couldn't get a blood pressure or pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital, and I still get jokes about raising the dead. I work graveyard shifts as an unarmed security guard. I've had the same post since starting with the company, now going on a year. It's in a fairly busy metropolitan area, but it's really quiet at night. There's a police station practically across the street, so I'm mostly just there to satisfy the insurance company on the off chance someone's brazen enough to try and steal building materials. The main area of the project is an office building. There's a multi-level parking structure that is attached. Also, mid-construction, the rear of the property is bordered by a tall concrete wall, after which there is a busy highway running parallel. Well, one night, maybe a week or two after Thanksgiving, I was sitting in my car, deep into an especially long and depraved session of Plague Inc., during which I repeatedly killed off all of Earth's inhabitants through various torturous and sadistic means. A thin layer of snow had already accumulated on my windshield since my last patrol. I couldn't really see out of it per se, but I had civilizations to neutralize. Being a good security guard is all about knowing your priorities. That all changed when something violently rattled my car. While I do have a gun, I do keep nunchuku on me at all times. Blue belt in Kung Fu, thank you very much. So I grabbed those and my Nebo O2 beam flashlight and jumped out of the car. I can't imagine what would be responsible for the disturbance, so I assumed that my field supervisor had something to do with it. He didn't have much of a sense of humor, but he made it a point to try and sneak up on unaware guards, although he wasn't very good at it. It's weird though. I exit my car and there's no one in sight. There's a thin layer of snow on the ground, so footprints or tire tracks would have been an obvious giveaway. I was about to write it off as a strange environmental effect when it happened again. I didn't feel like a shaking thing when I was on my feet though, more like a high amplitude current in the ground. Now I'm on high alert, so I switched to the emergency scanner app on my phone to see if they're getting any phone calls about an earthquake or explosion or something. There's no communication for a good 5 minutes, then some run-of-the-mill chatter about a drunk driver on the other side of town. I'm a little spooked now, but rather than get back in the car, I decide to do my next patrol a little early. I knew there was nothing to worry about, but figured it would put my mind at ease to check the site for myself just in case. I started by looking around the parking structure. There was only one accessible entrance, which my car was parked in front of, but squatters are a thing and it was a cold night. Nothing. I still had one earbud in on the off chance that people started calling in. There's a domestic disturbance call, and then silence. Then the rumbling comes back. The whole structure feels like it's wobbling. I just check the last corner and decide to get out of there in case something decided to collapse. Just as I leave the garage, something in my periphery catches my attention. On top of the building, there are a few security lights, but one is completely obscured by a lift and construction materials. So when I tell you that I saw the silhouette of a man on top of the building, understand that it really was just a silhouette. My paranoia is pretty peaked at this point, which I factored into my assessment of the situation while taking no comfort from it whatsoever. I decided to grab my binoculars out of the car, which I felt confident would reveal the silhouette to be nothing more than heightened paranoia and a stack of 2x4s. When I got back to the car, I just about lost my mind. There was an impression in the snow, like someone had laid across my hood. 2 handprints were melted into the windshield. No footprints or tire tracks, except for the ones I knew without question I had made. I pulled out my smartphone, not really sure what I hoped to do with it, but you understand the impulse. It was off. Battery dead. Before I got out of the car, the phone had been plugged in and was charging, over 90% battery. Then I felt the rumble again, and I promptly got into the car after checking the back seat and drove it to the other end of the site. If there was a squatter there, I conceded victory. Either way, I never got complaints from the foreman or supervisors. I asked one of the other guards if he'd seen anything weird while working, and he just shrugged. To this day, I still have no idea what happened. This happened when 4 friends and I were camping one night. A typhoon was approaching Japan. The weather forecast had stated that it wasn't on course for our campsite, but it had changed direction, so we were forced to check into a guest house. It wasn't raining, but our tents wouldn't be able to withstand the strong typhoon winds. We approached a guest house, and the building was magnificent, and we were welcomed by the cheerful owners. It was great. They guided us to our room, which was opposite the hotel's banquet hall. "We don't often use this room, but it might be a little noisy tonight," the owner said in a hushed voice. "I'm sorry. I hope it doesn't ruin your stay with us." My friend and I went into our room and settled down. We ate and drank some of the food and alcohol we packed for our trip, and we could hear some noise from next door. The party in the banquet hall never got as loud as we were led to believe it might, and I decided to have a look around the guest house since it was a really nice place. I walked past the banquet hall and noticed something. The lights were off. I could tell by looking under the door. I could hear voices murmur in there. I went back to our room and told my friends about what I'd heard. They followed me and stood outside the banquet hall and listened. They could hear it too. "Ha, maybe there are ghosts in there," one of my friends said. We weren't scared, but the more we drank, the more curious we became. Later, one of my friends knocked on the wall of the banquet hall and asked, "Did someone die here?" And then, a huge bang answered on the door. We assumed this indicated yes. "Should we light an incense stick for you?" one of my friends asked out loud. And another bang was heard. "How many should we light? How many of you are there?" It was silent for a moment. Then we heard multiple bangs. We froze in fear. I can't remember anything after that. I guess I could blame it on the alcohol. But I woke up in bed. I got up and ran out of the room and into the hallway. The owner's wife was walking towards me in this beautiful kimono. She had a huge bundle of incense sticks in her hand. She paused and smiled, and then said to me, "You heard it then?" I nodded. She told me that a long time ago there was a terrible typhoon which claimed many victims in the village. They had to use the banquet hall as a makeshift morgue until help arrived, and that now and then they make contact with the guests, and that they must have liked us. I've been backpacking and camping, mostly solo as an adult, for the majority of my life. I'm cautious about my surroundings, and I listen carefully when I'm out. I try to remain an observer and move through the land with little impact. I'm also very interested in the mysterious and the obscure, cryptids and the unexplained, reading all of the 411 cases as well. A few years ago, I set out to camp near an old-growth forest in North Georgia. Most old growth here is gone, but there are places that haven't been logged yet, and if you get the chance to visit one wherever you may live, I'd suggest it. It's beautiful, serene, and alive in a way that's hard to describe. This particular forest was one of hemlock and poplar, and the trees were massive. I had a guidebook that gave directions out into the sticks, following little country roads that eventually turned into gravel. After a long drive into a national forest, I parked near the trail, which was unmaintained, meaning it wasn't very popular or highly traveled. I hiked out through the woods to where the trail eventually just kind of stopped. There was very little undergrowth, and I spent the afternoon just exploring, looking at the trees and enjoying the calm. I eventually made my way down to a creek and crossed over it to an old field that formed a sort of bowl in the land with hills and ridges on all sides. The fact that there was a field means that there had, I guess at some point, been people living in the area, but I saw nothing of the sort when I was there, and my map showed that I should be far from any roads or settlements. I set up my tent and made some food. It was late when I decided to have a little smoke and lay out in the field in front of my tent
and look at the stars before bed. There was little to no light pollution, and I always relished the opportunity to enjoy the sky at times like those. As I was laying there, I began hearing a loud knocking sound from up near the ridge where I'd been earlier in the day, maybe 1,000 yards away. 3 knocks, and a long pause followed by 3 more, and then it would repeat. When I say knocks, what I mean is very loud noises, like 2 logs or trees being hit together, loud enough to reverberate in the little bowl I was in, loud enough that you could almost feel it. I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was night in the forest, and anyone who's been out there knows that it's dark. I thought that it had to be a person making that sound, because what else could make such a rhythmic sound? It was extremely loud and would have taken considerable effort to produce. I'd seen no one else at all during the day, and the direction from which the sound came was the section of old growth I'd explored earlier. And that's it. Eventually the sound stopped, and I went to bed feeling like I heard something I wasn't meant to hear. Or maybe I'd heard something specifically meant for me, and me alone. I packed up and hiked out the next day. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hyper-aware and waiting for something else to happen, but it never did. I've told friends about this, and they'll either say it was for sure a Sasquatch, or that I was for sure close to someone's house that I didn't know about. Why would a person be out in the woods late at night, banging logs together in the dark? This story happened to me and my friends. To set the scene, we were on a Boy Scout camping/shooting trip. There were between 20 to 30 of us, and we were in a little cabin thing with windows on the front and back, and a front and back door. There were wooden tables all around the area. The adult cabin, with the bathroom, was about 1/8 of a mile down a gravel road in the dark. There was obviously a buddy system because it's Boy Scouts. So it's around midnight, and everyone had been telling scary stories like normal camping trips. Well, I had to go to the bathroom and ask my friend to come along. He obliged, and we got our knives as we knew there were bears in the woods and it made us feel safer. We went to the bathroom, did our business, and began walking back. This is where it got scary. I felt an instinctual fear. I looked to my friend, and he has the same look as me. We begin to walk a little faster and unfold our pocket knives. I then turn around and see it. It looked similar to a cat but was 6 feet tall and on its hind legs, kinda hunched over. I freaked the heck out and started running. My friend sees it too, and we sprint back to the cabin. It began making a moaning/howling noise, and it was somewhere between the two, and followed us slowly. We pound on the door and the guys let us in. We tell them what we saw and they actually believe us, so we locked the front door, but when we went to do it to the back, it had no lock. We pushed a table up against it and had a kid there with his knife for safety. We draw the blinds on all the windows that had them, one of them didn't, and sat there with all the lights on. That's when we see eyes outside the window without blinds. We're all crapping ourselves, and the thing slowly walked back to the back door. We heard it bump against it, perhaps it was trying to open it, but left when it failed. That night, we thought we were going to die, and no one slept. When the adults came to wake us, we told them and they laughed and said that we were making it up. But we knew it happened, even though they didn't believe us. It's been many years now, and for context, a cenote is a sinkhole where people can go swimming. We went as a group of friends, and honestly everything seemed normal at first. The cenote was beautiful, like something out of a travel magazine. The water was crystal clear, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, making the surface sparkle. I couldn't really swim, so I decided to sit on this large rock near the edge of the water. It was warm and a little rough, but it felt safe. One of my friends sat next to me, since she wasn't much of a swimmer either. We just hung out there chatting and watching the others have fun in the water. At first, I thought I felt something touch my foot. It wasn't soft, but it wasn't rough either. I yanked my leg back immediately and looked around, but the water was calm with no sign of anything. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I imagined it, or a fish brushed by. A few minutes later, my friend screamed. I turned just in time to see her sliding off the rock into the water. She grabbed me as she went down, instinctively clutching my arm for dear life, and that's when I felt it. Something was pulling both of us down. I swear there were hands, not one but several of them, tugging at our legs and dragging us towards the center of the cenote. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel it, sharp bony fingers gripping and pulling. The water suddenly felt deeper, darker and colder. I couldn't breathe, neither could she. She was thrashing and I was trying to hold on to her while figuring out how to get my head above water, but it was like something was sucking us down into a whirlpool, and I thought I was going to pass out. Finally, our friend noticed and rushed over, and I remember feeling them grab me, but it wasn't easy. They were struggling to pull us up. They later told me they felt it too. Something was fighting back, pulling us the other way. Somehow, they got us out. My friend was spluttering and barely conscious, and I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. I felt like my lungs were on fire. Then I sat on the edge of the cenote, soaking wet and scared out of my mind, while they just tried to make sense of what had happened. Even now, some 14 years later, I still don't know what to make of it. Some people say the cenotes are mystical, and they're connected to something bigger or darker. I don't know if that's true, but I'm definitely never going near one again, and never went swimming after that.
We went to an apartment which was a local drug den. A female we knew called and said the male renter had been assaulted and she had to run. We got there and the door was bolted shut. I kicked the door over and over again and it wouldn't open. What I found out later is the dope team had done a search warrant on the apartment a few weeks earlier, and afterwards the tenants had reinforced the door jamb with a metal plate. It took me a total of 22 attempts kicking the door before I broke the deadbolt in half, which flew across the room and hit a wall. We made entry, guns drawn, and started clearing the apartment. This place was the kind of spooky I have only seen in places where a lot of meth is done. It was dark. There were swastikas, 666, and upside-down pentagrams painted on the walls, pictures of faces hung on the walls with the eyes X'd out, and a baby doll with her eyes scratched out with X's. As we cleared the first room, we started seeing the blood, first on the bed, then a trail on the floor leading into the back room. The layout was weird. One main room, then a back room, which was more a hallway, and a bathroom at the end of the hall. We followed the trail of blood down the hall to the bathroom door. In front of the door was a renter's dog, which was shaking uncontrollably and pissing all over the floor, scared out of its mind. As we got closer, the dog got really aggressive because it was scared. I made my way around the dog and entered the bathroom, where I found the renter hunched over in the shower, bleeding from his face, holding his cheeks with his hand. He was frantically trying to talk, pleading with us not to hurt the dog. Blood was dripping from his mouth, and I couldn't understand him. Then I saw the extent of what happened to him. His jaw had been dislocated on both sides when he was beaten by two men with a hammer, and it was just hanging on. As he was trying to plead with us, he could only attempt to talk by flicking his blood-covered tongue in the pattern of the words, because his jaw didn't work at all. Turns out the guy was a lower-level drug dealer, and he had been attacked by the two brothers, of whose other brother died of an overdose several years prior. The brothers always blamed the dealer for providing the drugs to their brother. They got drunk at a bar and assaulted the guy on their deceased brother's birthday. I know one of the guys since he was released from prison, and he's actually a really nice guy, kind-hearted, believe it or not. They just let their anger out, and it was a bit misguided. I know it's an understatement, but I can understand how someone could get into that frame of mind. The guy ended up going to hospital, and I assumed he turned out alright, as when he was released he went to collect his dog, but I don't know much more after that. I was an EMT for a while, and we got a call about someone who was riding their bike at a breakneck speed when they hit a car head first without a helmet. We went over immediately, and despite the fact it was broad daylight and we were in the middle of suburbia on a Saturday, no one even came to check on this poor guy. Seriously, the streets were empty. Usually a massive crowd gathers around violent accidents like this. His skull was pretty much smashed in and he was unresponsive. It was the worst head injury I'd ever seen. We assessed that he had a major skull fracture, a concussion, and he was bleeding profusely. He was also missing teeth and had a minor road rash, but fortunately he wasn't missing much skin. To give you an idea of how bad it was, this is the kind of injury that most people won't survive. If you did survive, you'd likely be a crippled vegetable. Normally we would have moved him off the road, but when someone has a head or neck injury, that isn't very safe. My partner, who was also training me, as I was still kind of new, went to check for his pulse while I began to unload our gear. He crouched down, felt for a pulse for a while, and then stood up and opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly the guy jumped up. He didn't use his arms to pick himself up, he just jumped to his feet. It startled the hell out of us. He looked at us, smiled, and attempted to grab his bike. We tried to stop him, but we didn't exactly want to wrestle him to the ground given his condition. He gets away from us and bolts into the woods without his bike. My partner was even more in disbelief than I was. He just stared at us where the man had run off to, mouth agape. He then turned to me and muttered, "The guy had no pulse, man." I asked him if he was sure, and he swore up and down that the biker was clinically dead. We contacted the authorities for assistance, and they sent a search and rescue team into the forest. I don't know if he was found or not, because we don't get much information about patients after they go to the professionals. Keep in mind this was in the Pine Barrens, so they had a lot of ground to cover. My best guess is that he went to a loved one's house out of confusion, but what I found odd about all this is that head injuries bleed like hell, so you'd think the guy would leave a long red trail of blood for the cops to follow. The year was 1990, and I was working in New York City as a paramedic and got pushed into this service. Let me give you a bit of context. 2 years before, at a place called the Happy Land Social Club, they received an inspection and were told that they had to shut down for building code violations for lack of fire exits, alarms, or sprinkler systems. But the fire department, being busy as it was, gave them no follow-up, and they never did so. Well, on the fateful night in 1990, a man called Julio Gonzalez got into an argument with his girlfriend who worked at the club taking coats. She told him that she didn't want to see him again, and he got angry. He went to an Amoco gas station and returned with a plastic container of $1 worth of gasoline. He hastily spread the fuel at the base of the staircase, which was the only access in or out of the club, and then ignited the gasoline. 87 people died in the resulting fire. 19 bodies were found downstairs and the others upstairs. 6 bodies were found within several feet of the front door. It was not a pleasant sight. 150 firefighters responded to the blaze, which was extinguished in 5 minutes. The guy was caught the next afternoon and was sentenced to prison, but he died within prison at age 61 of a heart attack. But taking you back to that night, the city had to borrow vans to remove the bodies into various areas for holding. Our borrowed van gave up after one of the several trips we had to take, with 4 bodies bagged in the back of the van for another van to come empty us to the wreck so that they could take the van away. Another old Ford van backs up into ours, and we began the slow process of lifting the bags by the corners and handing your handholds to the guy in the other van so they could gingerly slide the body over. Mind you, this is on a street in the Bronx, and as I lift one of the bags, I hear a whistle in the bag. That was concerning. There could have been a person still alive in there, so I violated the seal and opened the bag just to be sure that it wasn't a mistake. But it wasn't. When airways meet superheated gas, the edema closes them, and as we moved the body, the air was released from the chest and through a space in a shiny gold tooth. Hence, the body whistled at me. Grills still make my skin itch to this day.
This happened over a year ago. I remember that I left my family home just before lunchtime to head off to my part-time job. I always walked to work. I was saving for a car at the time, but the walk wasn't exactly a long one. It was a pretty dull one though. I grew up in a pretty rural place, and there were fields and fields as far as the eye could see. The houses in my area were all spaced out and sparse too, which meant there wasn't a whole lot of passing traffic. It was perpetually quiet. There wasn't ever much to look at on my commute by foot. Like I say, fields, a few houses, and there was a small cemetery along the way. On the day that this took place, there were no people on the streets and no passing cars. It was a really quiet day, and I didn't at all feel that with it either. Something was off. It was like I was constantly being absent-minded. I think I was a little overtired because the shift I had had the night before was pretty hard, as far as part-time work goes anyway. I was lazily marching my way to work, not thinking about anything in particular, and that's when I noticed something. Someone was behind me. Well, I felt as if there was someone directly behind me. I don't know when this person began to tell me because I hadn't been paying attention. I will have to explain a little about my commute at this stage for the next part of my experience to make sense. The road that I walked along to work was in a straight line. That straight line runs through the middle of all those open fields I spoke to you about, and most importantly, my journey along the straight line pretty much begins the moment I set foot outside my door. So there were no houses, buildings, winding roads, hidden lanes, alleys, or anything for someone to emerge from to join me on my walk without me noticing it. What I mean to say is everything was visible. If there was someone in a field or a mile away, I would have seen them coming in pretty much any direction. So how I ended up with someone tailing me without me realizing was something highly unusual to begin with. While I continued walking, I wondered how long this person had been following me for. When I thought about it a bit more, I realized the guy behind us was now closing the gap between us. Whoever was behind was now speeding up. Before I even looked behind me, I thought it might be a male. His footsteps were getting faster, so I decided to try and attempt to sly look over my shoulder to see who I was dealing with. However, when I looked back behind me, I noticed there was no one there. That's crazy. I stopped and turned around so that I could look back, and the strangest thing happened. I felt as if someone was staring at me, but there was also no one in sight. I knew something was looking at me. I could sense it. Some innate part of me knew that I wasn't alone. Something was there with me. I just couldn't perceive it. I immediately thought that I needed to get out of there and fast. I turned to leave, but my body resisted. I don't know if it was due to the shock, surprise, or fear, but I couldn't move a muscle. My back then felt cold. The chills I felt weren't limited to my back though. It was like an ill wind was flowing through me. I don't expect anyone to understand what I'm about to say next, but this is the best way I can describe it. It was like my internal organs were cold. It was like hands were rummaging around my insides and wrapping cold fingers around my beating heart. I felt that I needed to get out of there and fast. Something was seriously wrong.
I thought that if I didn't figure out how I could get out of there, something bad would happen. But in the end, I couldn't move. It was like an unseen person was holding me in place. I could almost feel arms around my neck. It felt disgusting. Then, without warning, I was released. I sprinted as fast as I could from the scene. It took place while periodically looking behind me as I ran. I headed to my part-time job, and all the while the weird sensation I felt around my neck did not subside. My neck was feeling very uncomfortable. I tried not to think about it. I tried to chant this sutra healing chant in my head while I walked. When I got home, I had some medicine, but the pain didn't subside, and after I had some of my lunch, I ended up throwing up in the bathroom. I finished work, and by the evening, when my day of work was done, I still didn't feel any better. I had no appetite, so I went to bed without eating, and didn't sleep well either. After an hour or two of light sleep, I woke up and vomited again. I was really concerned about my health for a while there, but after about a week I managed to return to normal. I was really relieved. I was worried about myself. I didn't know what I could do. I have walked along that road many times since that day, but never encountered that same thing again. I have thought about it a little more, and maybe what I experienced was some kind of spirit passing through. It definitely feels like the whole thing was paranormal. I mean, I'm no expert, and if anyone knows what that thing might have been, and if I should be worried, or should have done something else, then I'm all ears. My friend and I were hiking in Blue Ridge, Georgia. We were just going camping for one day, and the trail was part of the Appalachian Trail, near the very start of it. My friend told me a story about one of his friends, and said that he heard voices and footsteps at night near Blood Mountain, and he had to night hike because the noises were so intense. So back to the main story. We found a campsite and set up shop. As it got darker, we got a bad feeling, like something was watching us. Then it started. We saw a pair of red glowing eyes about 100 to 150 feet away from our fire. Then my friend goes to dunk his head into the creek near our tent and claims something pushed him into the water. His shirt was soaked and he hit his nose on a rock and was bleeding. Then, after that, we heard a woman's voice but couldn't make out her words. It was from in front of us, behind us, and to the left of us over the creek. It could have been a night hiker, but to the left there was no trail, and the night hikers weren't using a flashlight if they were. We also heard footsteps around us and sticks snapping. We finally just got into the tent and tried to sleep. My friend fell asleep before me, and I heard twigs snapping right next to my head outside the tent. And that's pretty much it. It's very creepy. If you decide to go camping in Blue Ridge, just know there are things out there lurking at night. Many years ago, I had an encounter with a Wendigo. I'm part Cherokee, and had heard about these monsters before. It was late at night. I was a teenager, and I lived with my family. We had a few dogs and they needed to go outside before bed. One of the dogs would only go in our backyard. One of my family members opened the back door, and at that moment the dog became instantly aggressive. This is a dog that had never shown aggression before or after this night. Just as fast as she became aggressive, she became scared and ran back inside. I had just kicked my boots off after wearing them all day and was about to get changed out of my jeans when this happened. I quickly put my boots back on and grabbed a flashlight and a large club that I had recently made. I booked it out to the back of our house and just stopped dead in my tracks. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything, but something was there. I could feel a dark presence, if that makes sense. Then I see a shadow. It's huge and moving, easily 8 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, but had these massive antlers.
Normally my flashlight is able to illuminate everything pretty well, but tonight I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was like the light was going into a void. My eyes adjusted to the low light, and I stand there for what seemed like an eternity as I watch the figure search a workbench before it stops. The figure looks straight forward before turning to face me, to reveal glowing red eyes. The figure and I stare at each other for what must have been just a moment, but felt like eons. I know that showing fear in the situation was only going to get me killed, but for some reason I lifted the club and pointed it at the figure. The figure curiously looked at the club and back into my eyes, before slowly nodding its head up and down. I see my flashlight turn off in my peripheral vision. I look at it, and it turns back on, this time illuminating the entirety of the property. I quickly turn my focus back to the figure, but it was gone. What was lifetimes to me was no more than a minute in reality, and I wonder what it all means, if anything.
It was a blistering summer afternoon in the early 2000s, the kind where the heat shimmered off the pavement and the air smelt like sunscreen and salt. We were at the beach. It was packed. Colourful towels, dripping ice cream cones, and kids screaming. My 6-year-old cousin and me at 10 were on the shoreline, kneeling in wet sand, sculpting a sandcastle. The tide licked our feet, the water warm and familiar. Our parents sat a short distance away, sunbathing and chatting, trusting that we were safe as we were still in sight. Or at least that's what we thought. I don't remember seeing the couple walk up. One second it was just me and my cousin, and the next they were there. A man and young woman, maybe in their early 20s. They knelt down beside us. The man had shaggy brown hair, long jeans that would darken at the hems from seawater, and the woman had sunglasses so big I couldn't even see her eyes. But she smiled an awful lot. "Wow, what a cool sandcastle," the man said in a smooth voice. "Did you guys make this by yourselves?" My cousin nodded excitedly. I stared. Something about them made my stomach turn. Their clothes were mostly dry. Their skin wasn't sunburnt or sandy like everyone else's. They didn't have towels or beach bags or anything there that said they were here to swim. They weren't here for the beach. They were clearly there for some other reason. Then the woman crouched lower. "You guys are about the same age as our kids. A boy just like you, 10? And a little girl like you, 6. We hadn't told them our ages. A wave crashed beside us, and even though we were surrounded by hundreds of people, it felt like we were alone. "You should come with us." It wasn't a question. I went rigid. My cousin obviously just kept packing wet sand into a mold, but I knew I had to run. I swallowed hard and said, "I'll be right back." And then I turned and ran, until I reached my parents. When I told them what happened, my aunt's face changed, and she took off running towards the water where my cousin was. When she got there, the couple were gone, vanished. Just my cousin still playing by the castle, patting the walls in place, completely unaware of how close she had been to disappearing forever. I know I shouldn't have left her alone. I know I should have grabbed her hand and pulled her with me, but I was 10, and I thought she was still safe. I'm 32 now, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have agreed to go with them. Would we have ever been seen again, or even been here at all?
I was working as a paramedic, and my station had a mental hospital in our area. They knew they weren't allowed to call us for basic transport, and there had to be an emergency. We get a call there one night for a possible stroke on the 4th floor. We knew that the 4th floor is where they kept people who were guilty of murder and rape, etc., and that a police officer would be with us. When we get there, the nurse has a look on her face that we are really about to walk into something sketchy, and she tells us that the lady won't stop looking to her left, which was her excuse for calling us and saying it was a stroke, and talking to something. When we walk into the room, she's in full conversation with something outside the window. We ask her to talk to us and she got quiet. We load her up and the law enforcement officer cuffs her to the gurney. When we get outside, she looks back towards the window and then quickly shoots her head to the other side and said, "It's cool how fast they fly." About 5 minutes from the hospital, she asks me if I'm worried about the ambulance because it's about to break down, and that her and her yellow flying friends are about to rape and kill us. I said no, and she started this screeching laughter that I'll never forget. The law enforcement officer was as white as snow and said nothing to her. We drop her off in the ER, come back outside, and the ambulance had cut off and wouldn't start. I went back inside to ask the law enforcement officer if he had turned it off, and they said that he hadn't walked in with us. We couldn't find him, and dispatch sent a bunch of cars out to look for him as he wasn't at the hospital. They found him sitting in his cruiser back at the mental hospital, and he couldn't remember how he got there. To this day, I really think her and the law enforcement officer saw something. When I first joined the police, during our first 2 days of training school, we had this lecture from an officer who had been in the force a long time, at least 20 years. He told us some of his weird experiences while policing. He said he'd been out on patrol in a car when they got a call to an abandoned house. He got there and it was a big house, sort of isolated. They knocked on the door and no one answered, so we went to open the door and it was unlocked. He walked in. The house was empty, no people, no furniture, no possessions, completely vacant. He looked around and found no one there, but then he looked upstairs and thought he saw someone move. He went upstairs. It was a really big house with a long hall upstairs, and when he got up there he saw someone going to the bedroom right at the end of the hall. He followed the person there, calling out as he went. Again, all the other rooms were completely empty, even of furniture. When he got to the room, he saw the person going in, and he found it completely empty. No one was in it, and nothing was there apart from a long mirror. He walked into the room and looked into the mirror. He told us he saw something in the mirror that he said has haunted him for the rest of his life. He said he wouldn't tell us what he saw, and said he'd never tell anyone, but that it terrified him. He turned around and left the room to leave, and as he walked down the hallway he saw that all the rooms were now filled with furniture. No one was there still, but the house no longer looked abandoned. He said he left the house that day never knowing what happened or who had called the police, but was absolutely positive of what he'd seen. He was completely serious, and it was obvious that he really believed in what he'd seen, and it gave me chills down my spine when he was telling us. I've never forgotten it. I was working in a small rural hospital ER. The morgue and autopsy room were adjacent to the ER, and a couple of ENTs came in to the break room and for a chat, as it was a slow night. They asked me if I'd ever seen a drowning victim. I told them no, and they wanted to show me the body in the morgue. So we went in there and pulled out the drawer, and there's this body laying on the tray. They are pointing out some stuff to me, when suddenly they both ran out the door and flipped the light off. Now I'm standing a foot away from a dead body in the dark. Damn them. I worked my way over to the door and tried to get out, but they were holding the door and laughing hysterically. So I decided to be real quiet, and after a few minutes they began to worry. I could hear one of them say, "Do you think she fainted?" Then the door began to open slowly. As soon as I could get a foot in it and a grip on it, I yanked it open and cussed the crap out of them. Morgue after midnight? No thank you. I'm a first responder. This call happened probably 2 years ago. We got a call for a woman who fell down the stairs and hit her head. The cops beat us there and began talking with the woman. We, me and my partner, get there and start looking at her head. She says she takes medicine but is unsure what type, so she told me to go to her bathroom and check her medicine cabinet for the pills she takes. When I get to the staircase to head upstairs, immediately there are gunshots. Thankfully, my ninja reflexes saved me. I'm joking. I think the guy just fired random shots down the stairs near me. The cops did not hesitate to take him out, didn't even fire a shot. After the gunshots at me, there were no more shots. The guy came out peacefully. I mean, it would have made sense for her to tell her husband that she was getting seen to and called an ambulance, but there you go. I was a police officer for a metro department for 7 years, before having to be medically retired. While at work one day, my partner and I were sent to a call of a family member who had found their sister, Donna, dead in her home. After a short investigation, medics pronounced her deceased, and after a conversation with the medical examiner and our sergeant, Donna's body was released to the funeral home. There was only one bathroom in the home and it was upstairs. Donna's bedroom was also upstairs across the bathroom. Donna had taken the door off her bedroom, as it was a small bedroom and there wasn't room for it to close with the bed inside. Donna had passed away as if she was praying at her bedside, but needed to nap. Her family asked we cover her with a blanket for her dignity, and for when they needed to use the bathroom. I went back upstairs and covered her up with a blanket from her bed and said, "There you go, dear." As I turned to leave the room, I heard, "Thank you," clear as day from behind me. I turned around and saw nothing had changed, but I had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude and contentment. I am an atheist and have been for a very long time. The majority of things I saw at work reaffirmed my lack of beliefs, but after this encounter, I definitely believe in spirits and energy. While working as a firefighter, I've had a few seriously dangerous situations that have almost brought my death. There was this one time the air pack regulator malfunctioned while I was deep inside of a working structure fire. I ran out of air with no warning and thought at that moment I was going to die. Thankfully, I managed to make it out, but the fear that hits you when you have no air is something I wish on no one. On another occasion, we had been called to a fire, and there was a burning roof and a wall collapse on my partner and I. I literally was trapped and unable to squirm out. The intense heat pressing down on me, and my oxygen quickly depleting as I waited to get dug out. I was pretty sure at that moment that I was about to get roasted alive, and saw my life flash before my eyes. I was very lucky to have made it out of that one with my life. This happened when I was in university when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were very dark and I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight, and all of a sudden my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste my time guessing, I figured I'd call roadside rescue, as it was included within my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night, and after a little while a bright light lit up the road, and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue was early, and I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got a little closer, I realized it wasn't them at all. It was strange. It didn't look like the lights of a normal headlight. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and then didn't move. I was getting a bit weirded out now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into two light sources, whatever was in front of me only had one. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it, and then I saw 3 people approaching from behind the light. These people were very thin and tall, at least 6'6". As they moved behind the light in front of it, I could see the lines in their faces. They were very gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about the 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then I realized what it was. It was their style of clothes and hair. They looked like they were from another time. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again, I noticed something slightly off-putting about the people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. He was emphasizing the wrong syllables, and I'm not sure how to explain it exactly, but it wasn't right. It made listening to him difficult, yet I detected no accent to indicate they're a foreign. "Where did you come from?" he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to get away with them. "You have a trouble with your car and I can fix it," he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks, but no thanks. I'd already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent and I kept refusing. I didn't really want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then, the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing, like I had to mentally wrestle with myself to not allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming and the other half imploring me to get back into the car and lock the doors. I couldn't fight it. It felt like I should go with these men, go where they wanted me to go. I started following them towards the light. Like a moth to the flame, I was transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it any longer. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming at me to do anything to get away from these men, but my internal voices were getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must have been the roadside rescue people because it snapped me back to reality and I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that I needed the phone to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people, as I really wanted to be accurate and I didn't want to be out here anymore. While I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer for help. I hated the way they towered over me, and their faces were so pale and thin like barn owls, but I refused. I ran back to my car with the phone clamped to the side of my head, and that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation. But given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust them. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their forehead and then slapped it, as if you're high-fiving your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I didn't have a clue what the gesture was supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and was then gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up, and the guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started. What really freaked me out is that I know the engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction of the light and managed to get home without further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a very strange rash all over my body. I went to a dermatologist and she couldn't figure out what had caused it. After 10 days or so, it went away with the cream and ointment I got from her. I'm sure the rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men. I'm not even sure they were that. 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that she was driving in the mountains in the same area as I, with her boyfriend, and they saw something similar to what I had. She said that on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people sniggered, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have an encounter with something that wasn't of this world?
I had just moved to the US for law school. Anne had made a few friends who were also from Spain like I was. Charlotte, Anne, and Lisa. We were having a really good time in the US, and in September of 2023, we decided that we would do a bit of exploration, and opted to go on a road trip to Canada, drive around Lake Ontario, and drive back to New York City through upstate New York. I am a guy, and everything went super smoothly until our last night there. For our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were about a half hour away from Harrisburg. Lisa and I had decided to spend one night in this cabin to be at one with nature. It was super old, made from logwood, and there was no running water nor electricity. Both Lisa and I had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I myself had been a Boy Scout for my whole life, and was even a scout leader for a while. Our other 2 friends were, as much as I loved them, purebred city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping, or to just be in a place where there was no phone signal, as was the case with this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m, and it was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost connection with the GPS, and I had to drive to the cabin on intuition, paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safely on these muddy trails. On the way there, Anne and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment they lost their phone service, they were very uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire, but there were no houses around or people, just a campfire, well organized since the fire was not spreading and it was not as big as a bonfire. It kind of startled us as we were quite remote. It was also getting quite late. When this happened, we reached the end of the trail and figured we had taken the wrong trail at a crossroad before, so I turned around and we were on our way again. Half hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later too, we finally arrived to our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this god-forsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea of how old it was, the toilet was made from wood, and this was outside the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anne and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car and going into a cabin with zero light. So Lisa and I left the lights of the car on and went inside the cabin while using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we couldn't, as all the wood was still wet from the rain, and it seemed no one had prepared any dry wood anywhere. So, with a couple of old flashlights and a small, improvised fire that I managed to make in the stove, we all got in the cabin, and I started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room/space with a bed where all 3 of the girls would fit, and I would sleep downstairs in a bunk bed that was probably here since before the First World War. While making pasta, Anna came up to me, knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, and told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had also seen a figure walking around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. I do not consider myself a big believer in scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very seriously, and to swear to God is a very serious oath for us, and she swore to God that she wasn't lying. I told her then that I believed her, but there was no need to panic, as I would lock all the doors when we went to sleep. We had some pasta, some s'mores, and each had a beer. Then I decided to have one or two more. The girls were getting kind of tired, so they went up to bed. And I, with my last beer, decided to just sit outside and watch the rain, as I do deeply enjoy listening to it. So I sat myself down with my beer, and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this coming from New York City, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was nothing much really to see beside a lot of trees and a small creek a little further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird roar. The first thing that came to my mind was a bear, but I had researched well before our trip and knew that bears were very uncommon in this part of the state. I also knew that a bear roar would not sound like this, except for the fact that it was quite deep. I was startled, but not very scared. I continued to scan the rest of the forest as far as I could see from the porch. It was then, at that moment, that I caught a glimpse of a figure. It was hidden deep within the tree line. I was looking at it. It was at least 6'4", and it was hidden well with brown fur, blended in with the trees in autumn. And I saw two eyes glinting from the reflection of my flashlight. I wasn't entirely sure what it was at this distance, but it was not a bear. It was bipedal and had rather long arms. We looked at each other for probably no more than 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity when it vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then that I got goosebumps and all the hair stood up on my body. I was very scared. That was the catalyst for me to go inside as quickly as I could, lock all the doors, and close every curtain. I quickly went to bed and told myself that surely it was just my exhausted mind, and after an hour or so I calmed down and finally fell asleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself after having drunk beer the night before, the weather cleared and it was rather sunny, and as far as I could see the forest was calm and beautiful, with no sight of any animal or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps. And so ends the story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night because I know all 3 girls would not want to hear it, and I figured after these months that it was best to share it here. If anyone has any idea what it could have been, feel free to enlighten me, especially if it's backed up with rational reasoning. I realize how unbelievable this story might be, but I assure you it's entirely true. I've had countless experiences with the supernatural since I was 4, and I'm 33 now. But this is one of the most terrifying ones I've ever had. I had an experience with what I believe to be a wendigo this fall in early October in northern Minnesota in a state forest, very close to, if not on, a reservation. I've always heard that speaking to them can draw them to you, but I hadn't thought of or listened to any wendigo stories anytime close to my encounter. I was staying with some very dear friends, Mary and Carol, and they have a camper in their yard by the lake for guests to sleep in. I had walked down to the camper from the house with my miniature dachshund, Ebony, around midnight, and found that I needed to set some things up, primarily the heater. By the time I was done getting everything in order, it was about 1:30 a.m. I never thought to lock the door because really I figured I'm in the middle of the woods, so there was nothing to worry about. But I was wrong. I had to close the curtains, and I was having trouble falling asleep because my anxiety was going mad. Mary and Carol's dogs were barking outside, and their geese wouldn't stop honking. Ebony, who usually sleeps under the covers, was sitting on my hip while I laid on my side, and I could feel her turning her head back and forth like she was trying to track something outside. I tried tucking her under the blankets to calm her down, but she kept returning to her perch on my hip. I have no idea how long I laid there, perhaps 40 minutes, when all of a sudden I heard Mary's voice outside the camper. "Anyone in there?" And then I heard a sound that sounded like claws dragged down the side of the camper. I almost called back when I realized that number one, she and Carol were both asleep by now, and two, Mary knew I was there. She wouldn't ask if anybody was there. That's when I noticed everything had gone absolutely silent outside. The dogs and the birds had stopped carrying on. The gusts of wind had even stopped. It was the kind of silence you hear about in horror stories, how the woods go mute when something evil is in the area. Then another thought hit me. Ebony would be losing her mind and barking at the door if it had been anything human. She was frozen on my hip, dead quiet and shaking. I dare not move, but I was really starting to have to pee, and I remembered that I hadn't locked the door. I have no idea how long I laid there, debating whether if I should get up to use the restroom and lock the door, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, I guessed it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I thought it may have been a skinwalker at first, but remembered they don't mimic the voices of your loved ones to lure you out into the woods. Wendigos, however, do. I knew these creatures, demons, whatever they are, can lure humans out of their abodes, and if they make contact with you, and everything was screaming in me to make sure I didn't look outside. I made doubly sure I didn't look through any cracks in the curtains as I walked softly to the front of the camper and very slowly turned the lock, praying and holding my breath. I made sure to keep my eyes away from the windows as I crawled back in bed and pulled Ebony close as she finally stayed under the blankets. I snuck a peek at my phone for the first time before I laid down. Figured it had to be close to 3 a.m. It was 2:30. As soon as I laid down, the wind kicked back up, and Mary and Carol's basset hounds erupted into howls, and they came running down to the camper, and a little way away into the trees. The geese started their noise again. I heard the bassets come down to the camper, barking a few more times before they laid down outside the door, as if to protect me. I didn't get out of bed that night. I told Mary and Carol what happened the next morning. I think I was hoping Mary would say she had come down to check on me and Ebony, but she confirmed what I already knew. They had gone to bed as soon as I had left the house. I said a prayer over their house, the camper, and all of us the following night, and had an uneventful night, thank God. I also spoke to another guy who's familiar with the supernatural to see if he knew any more about Wendigos. I'm not sure how accurate the information he gave me was, or if it's reliable at all, but when I asked him why Ebony hadn't made a peep, I had assumed it was because she was absolutely petrified. He said Wendigos can control the animals to keep them from alerting their owners of its presence. He also told me that they can't enter the house that aren't made of wood directly from the forest they're hunting in, tents and campers included, because they consist of man-made materials. A lock is useless. They can unlock and open a door so they can try and lure you out, and they typically stay in the woods, but they will come into a smaller town and never into a city. I had never heard any of the things he told me before, so again I can't speak for the accuracy, but I also haven't researched their claims either. He also advised me to never go outside to pee at night. If I ever go camping, bring a bucket or something, and to make sure I always close the tent flaps and curtains before falling asleep. He said if the flaps are open and you can see outside, it might make eye contact with you, and thus draw you out. After leaving Mary and Carol to go to my father's house for a few days, I had the distinct feeling of being watched when I took Ebony outside after dark. My father lives 3 hours away from Mary and Carol, but his house is in the country. I told myself it was only the fear of the experience and what I know about the Wendigo triggering an overactive imagination. I never heard anything, and I watched Ebony's behavior very closely, and she didn't act like she had in the camper. I'm moving back from that area from Canada, and this experience has been weighing heavily on my mind. I have been trying to find any information about warding them off, or if they have a home hunting range like cougars do, or if they can move on from a region. My prayers did work the second night, so I figure I can just pray over the property. I also have holy water that I can use, and as it's an evil creature that possesses people or physically manifests, I would hope it would work. Frustratingly, a majority of what comes up in searches is utter garbage. Does anyone know if they stay in one area? Are my concerns about it coming back when I get moved into my cabin warranted? Or am I worrying excessively? Does anyone have any tips for warding them off? It would be greatly appreciated.
This is a memory I buried so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. It only surfaced again recently, when my siblings and I were reminiscing about our dad, how absent-minded and scatterbrained he could be, sometimes in ways that made us laugh until we cried. But when someone brought up how he once left my brother at the gas station for 40 minutes, something cracked open with me. I remember the beach, the boy, the water. I was about 4 years old when this happened. I'd taken a bad fall on the playground and split the back of my head open, which needed stitches, my first real injury. I screamed like a banshee getting them in, but weeks later when it came time to take them out, I sat stoically still for the doctor, determined to be brave. My dad was so proud he rewarded me with ice cream and a spontaneous trip to the beach. It was a small, mostly forgotten town in the Australian coast in the middle of summer. The beach should have been bustling, but it was strangely quiet. Just a few kids splashing around in the shallows, hardly any parents and no lifeguard. My dad walked me to the shoreline and gave me a serious look. "No deeper than your knees, not till I get back." He then turned and walked off, probably to use the toilet or take a phone call. He wasn't a bad dad, but just distracted. He loved us, but he didn't always think. I stayed where he told me, kicking at the waves. That's when a boy, of around 11, broke away from the group of kids further down and began drifting closer. He had blonde hair that stuck to his forehead in wet strands, and a weird grin. As he came closer, he said hi and asked my name and how old I was. I remember feeling flattered. A big kid talking to me? I wanted him to think I was cool, so I told him everything. How brave I'd been at the doctor's, how I got a sticker, and how I barely cried. He laughed. That's when he asked me why I wasn't swimming properly. I explained my dad said no deeper than my knees until he got back, as, truthfully, I wasn't a strong swimmer yet. He leaned forward. "It's okay, I'll teach you. It doesn't count if someone's helping." I hesitated. "What's wrong, you scared? I thought you were brave." I don't remember deciding to follow him. 1 minute I was standing where the water lapped at my knees, and the next I was further out, feet losing contact with the sandy bottom. The other kids had turned away, and then he grabbed me. There was no warning, no playfulness. He dunked me fast and hard beneath the surface and held me there. I thrashed and kicked. My arms flailed. I was so small and his grip was so strong. He just kept me under. Salt water filled my nose and mouth. I couldn't scream and I couldn't breathe. My chest burnt. I remember the sun flashing through the surface above me like shattered glass. I fought for as long as I could until he let go. Suddenly I was being hauled up out the water, coughing, choking and screaming. My dad's arms clutched me against his chest, water pouring off both of us.
His face was twisted in this terrible mix of confusion, fury, and terror. He held me like he didn't know how to let go, patting my back while I coughed up more and more water and wailed onto his shoulder. By the time I could speak, the boy had gone. The beach was nearly empty. The other kids had scattered. My dad wrapped me around in his shirt and sat with me until I stopped shaking. Then once I was calm enough to sit upright, he started driving around. For hours, we searched. I don't think he would have hesitated to take that boy's life had we found him. I never told my mum. I don't think he did either. It became one of those traumas that everyone agrees never to bring up. But it's never really gone. I still think about it sometimes, what might have happened if Dad hadn't have come back when he did, and if the boy didn't let go, and if the beach had been just a bit more empty. Because I now know exactly what he was doing. He lured me out deliberately, away from the shallows and away from witnesses. A 4-year-old alone with no adults around would have looked like a tragic drowning. Drowning a child is the perfect crime. And that sick, twisted, and demented boy knew it.
This happened about 3 years ago. I got dispatched for traffic control by a fellow company for lines down on a high traffic road. It's about 7:30 a.m. We got on the scene and see a big-ass wire hanging smack dab in the middle of the road. What we don't realize was that there was a big-ass triaxle logging truck laying in the ditch 20 feet away that we passed driving on the scene. At first glance on arrival, I literally said, "Looks like the neighboring company has a big-ass tree down." Nope. What it was the truck was covered in logs. Somehow the driver survived and was walking around. That 7:30 a.m. call wasn't finished till 4 p.m. I missed my college classes and was almost crushed and/or ran over several times while running traffic due to a member's call, whom I still want to punch square in the lower jaw. I am a firefighter, and I took a small team to the rear of a home that was fully engulfed in flames. I kick in the door and kneel down into the corner. I start hitting the fire across the room when my right side got hot. Turns out I was leaning against a couch that lit up quickly, but no one else could see because of the smoke and the wall between us. So naturally I turned my attention to it and put it out. It was about that time I feel a tap on my shoulder and one of the guys was saying to hit the ceiling. I had almost instantly become engulfed, so while putting it out, some ammunition across the room started popping off. We decided to pull back out, and I was the last one to exit, and what was left of the ceiling collapsed and almost crushed me. And that was the time that I nearly perished on the job. Being a firefighter is not for the faint of heart. I am a medic and firefighter, and I had a call once. I don't remember what we were initially called for, but they told the dispatch that they were in the barn. Something seemed off and we looked through a window before going in. A shotgun was pointed at the door and rigged to fire if the door opened. The caller had hung themselves in the barn before we got there. My very first call as a medic after orientation with an EMT partner that tried to stab me. I've also had a gun pulled on me while I walked up to a vehicle involved in a rollover. He seemed to be fully intending to shoot, and I was lucky enough to notice and react quickly enough. So as you can see, my job has nearly had me lose my life on multiple occasions. I was living in Lacey, Washington when this happened. I was living in an apartment complex located just off Ruddell Road. The road has a nasty curve, not far away, that was prone to car accidents, especially at night, some serious while others fatal. One evening while watching TV in the living room, the power suddenly flickered and then blinked out. Seconds later I could hear the sound of a car crashing on the main road. In the silence that followed, I decided to put on my shoes and black trench coat and run up the road to see if anyone needed help. When I got to the road, I immediately looked to my left where the infamous curve was. There, in the small stand of trees that lined the road, was an overturned car. From what I could tell, the car had taken out a power pole on the other side of the road before careening into the small stand of trees, coming to rest on its hood. Next to the car, there was a small yet thick crowd of people standing in a circle. I jogged over, having to practically push my way through the crowd to find out what they were silently staring at. At the center of this macabre crowd is a young woman. She was moaning and writhing around, eyes wide with terror and wet with tears, as she kept scanning the crowd of silent observers, pleading for help with her gaze. I dashed in, knelt down beside her and grasped her left hand. The crowd took a collective step back, and then I suddenly remembered the story from my childhood. My stomach sank. These were them, the people. You see, I once read a young adult book series called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that as a child I would often check out from the public library. In one of the books, there's a particular story by Ray Bradbury called The Crowd, which is about a man who ends up in a car wreck. After being dug out of the car, he finds himself surrounded by a thick crowd of people silently watching. They don't move or speak, they just stare down at him. When the paramedics arrive, the crowd vanishes. This was the only story in the series that truly frightened me. Little did I know that years later, this story would prepare me for my own real-life encounter with the crowd. As I looked upon them, it was real. It was all around us, and I felt like I was keeping this crowd from coming closer and doing who knows what. "Just look at me. Just look at me," I said, trying to push my fear down. To my relief, her eyes flickered to mine, and I told her, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Has anyone called 911 yet?" There was no response from the crowd. I quickly fished my cell phone from my pocket and dialed it myself, one hand on the phone, the other on the woman's hand. It was an agonizing few minutes before the paramedics arrived, and I kept speaking to her, both to calm her and myself, while simultaneously looking up at the people. When the paramedics finally arrived, the crowd abruptly vanished, exactly like in the story. I didn't let go of the woman's hand until I was literally a shoulder width from the paramedics. At that point, I walked back to the sidewalk and looked around. There were only a few neighbors at the opposite end of the street watching what was going down. Other than that, the street was deserted. I shuddered, looked at the woman one more time, and then ran back home. To this day, I can't remember what the ending was of the scary story, and I feel like I don't need to know. I saw it with my own eyes.
There was this abandoned factory in my hometown. It used to be a milk factory. One of my friends went in there once and told me there were a ton of adult magazines in there, and it was really popular in my friend's circle. It's like the abandoned factory was ours, you know. This all happened when I was in high school. After school one day, I went with 2 friends to see the abandoned factory myself, and to be honest, I guess we were less interested in the factory itself and more on getting our hands on those magazines. When we arrived, we found a treasure trove of materials. There were videos as well as magazines. They were all lying on the ground just outside the factory. We decided that we would look over the place. The window frames were rotten and the glass was smashed. We found a way in. It wasn't much of a gap, and it would only fit one of us at a time, but we had our way in. We wanted to look around more and see if there were other magazines. The ones we found were fine, but some which didn't have pages stuck together would have been even better. We got in and were strolling around on the ground floor. It was a really big place. One of my friends realized he needed to go home and do some errands, and my other friend said he wanted to leave with him. I didn't want to leave without checking upstairs, as I was sure I was going to find more treasure. So I went to the stairs by myself. There was broken glass and dust all over the stairs, and I could tell that no one had climbed these stairs for a while. Upstairs there were a ton of doors, and most of them didn't even open. I felt kind of bummed out. Someone must have locked them all. Then I walked a little further down the hall and found a room which was open. I pushed the door open to reveal countless dead pigeons all over the floor. It was seriously weird. In that room, I noticed there was a hole in one of the walls, like a few of the bricks had been removed. I went over to have a look. I didn't really know why I didn't turn back. I guess I had gone far enough in the treasure hunt that I couldn't be stopped. My heart was beating in my chest, and I felt excited that I might be about to discover something that all the kids in my school would be envious of. I looked in the hole, and there was nothing but bones, long bones like the one of the skeleton in science class. They looked large enough to belong to a human. That was enough to frighten me and persuade me to end the treasure hunt, and I ran for it. Something deep down told me to get the hell out as quickly as possible, and I shattered all the glass on the stairs as I ran, and when I got home I was too afraid to tell my parents what had happened for fear of being in trouble for looking at the magazines. When night fell and I was laying in my bed, my brain tormented me with the possibilities, and I saw those bones every time I tried to sleep. It was very stressful. The next day at school I told my friends about what had happened, and they didn't believe me. So I went back to the factory again and showed them what I'd seen. Being accused of lying is way scarier than some old bones in the factory. And we climbed the stairs and got to the room at the end of the hall and opened the door. All the pigeons were gone, and I was shocked and immediately went back to the room where the hole was and discovered the bones were gone as well. I remember getting upset because my friends didn't believe me, but in the end I think I convinced them. This was the first strange and creepy thing that had happened to me. It was really unexplainable. Where were the bones and pigeon corpses? After this event, the abandoned factory stood there for about half a year before it was torn down. It still feels very mysterious to me, but now that I'm older and I have time to think about it, I think that someone was living there. Maybe the glass on the stairs was their way of knowing if anyone was coming or going. For all I know, whoever brought those bones there could have been in one of those locked rooms I tried, and that thought sent a shiver up my spine. I'm so glad my gut feeling told me to get out of there, and I'm glad I listened to it. I went camping one summer with my parents, younger sister, and my friend. My friend and I were around 15 to 16 years old at the time. At the campground, my parents and sister stayed in a camper we owned, while my friend and I took a tent. We were still in the same lot. One night, it must have been close to midnight, and I was sitting in the tent with our flashlights on. The campground was completely silent, and it seemed as if everyone else around us must be asleep. When out of nowhere, my friend and I hear this kid yelling for help. It kept getting louder and louder until we could hear him running. We were trying to turn off our flashlights when we saw the shadow of this person's feet running past our tent. We turned off the lights and sat in complete silence, terrified as it sounded like another set of feet were running behind him as well. We waited for a while. When I peeked my head out of the tent finally, we saw nothing, heard nothing more, and we couldn't believe no one else was peeking outside or looking around with us. We were terrified, but ultimately made a run for it to the camper, and they all insisted they heard nothing, which made no sense to us because the screaming for help was so loud and directly next to us. To this day, my friend and I feel crazy because we know what we heard, and yet it seems no one else heard or saw this despite my family and so many other strangers being in close proximity. This happened in around 2007, and it still leaves me perplexed and freaked out. I'm 50 years old now, but this happened to me when I was about 18, in the 80s. Me and a couple of my other friends owned this huge bar with 3 levels of floors, and I would always have my own DJ booth in the whole bar. Anyway, the bar would open at 9 at night during this time, and didn't end until 2 or 3 the next morning. I love nature, and down in Alabama, especially where I lived, there was a bunch and lots of woods,
so I would always walk home after the party was over. It was one particular night that I'll never forget. It was like any other usual night. I was playing, the party would start at 9, end at 2, and after the security guards would start clearing the place, which would be full of people, I remember packing up and getting ready to go home. I would always get offers from my friends or even females I met at the night at the bar if I needed a ride home, since I rarely drove to the bar because, like I said, I really love to walk, especially at night, hearing the late night bugs, water flowing from the stream, and even the bobcats snarl at night. As always, I thought I would decline their offers, but would give them thanks. Tonight, I did just that and was on my way home. I would always take this route. I still remember it to this day. It was a long street passing both sides of the woods. I can't remember what the woods are called, but for probably any ordinary person, these types of woods would scare the crap out of them even during the day. This detail is just to give you a picture of how they are. Yes, during the day they are creepy, but at night I think they're like something out of a horror film like Jason or something. But I remember walking like usual, and I knew this route extremely well, and that it would be 15 minutes from me turning onto another street, which is where the woods would end on one side and would lead me straight to my house. During my walk I hear this rustling. I'm walking on the left side of the street, and the rustling is coming from the opposite. Now I was no stranger to the rustling. It wasn't the ordinary sound of no snake slithering or no bobcat moving around. No. These movements were much heavier. The sound was more just like rustling, as if you were rubbing your hands across leaves or wind blowing the trees. But the thing was in the air still. As I'm walking, I'm analyzing the sound. Half of me is saying, it has to be a human presence, when the other half is on edge. As I'm walking, the sound gets closer. It's as if whatever it is approaching me. As the sound gets to a certain point, I start to turn my gaze that way, and I kid you not, whatever this thing is, had the trees moving like they were on the verge of falling over. I was kind of scared crapless at this point, and tried to pick up my pace, but as I take one more gaze back at the sound, I see it. This is what I would describe as even a fearless man's worst nightmare. I stopped in my tracks when I see it. Right now, across the street from me, were a pair of 2 red glowing eyes, and as I start to analyze more, I see the thing is standing at least 10 feet tall. That's when I noticed its legs. They were more like tentacles. I stared at it for a few seconds, and then absolutely bolted. My mind was going haywire, and I ran and I ran and I ran until I found the first house and started banging on the door. It took a few minutes before a man came to the door. Clearly I had just woken him, as it was around 3 to 4 a.m. at this point. I begged for help, and he told me to go in and sit down on the couch while I tried to explain to him that I had just witnessed a terrifying creature. He instructed me to get into his truck and that we would go and check it out. He went and grabbed his shotgun, and we drove over to the spot in the woods where I had seen the creature, which of course was now gone. He seemed somewhat interested but disbelieving in my story, and after explaining that this had been exactly where it was, us looking around and finding nothing, he drove me back. It was on the way back that he mentioned that some of his farm animals had died lately under very strange circumstances. He dropped me off to my house, which wasn't far away, and left some parting advice for me, that I should stay out of the woods at night. I obliged him and haven't been back since. There's no way I want to meet the creature that haunts my nightmares again. My dad and stepmom were screaming at each other so loud it could have shaken the walls. Their arguments were exhausting and way too frequent. So that weekend, my dad packed my older sister and me into his truck and drove us a few hours south to my uncle's house. On our last day there, my dad took us to a decommissioned Navy battleship, now a rusting tourist attraction.
I'd never been on a ship before, and I remember being fascinated. The steel corridors, the claustrophobic sleeping quarters, the greasy smell of old machinery. It felt like a haunted house built for war. Somewhere along the way, this man appeared. He was just there suddenly, standing near the entrance to one of the long corridors. Older, scruffy and unshaven, wearing saggy khaki shorts and a stained white shirt. He started talking to my dad. My dad, always polite, always sociable, humoured him. He didn't seem threatening at first. The man kept popping up though. Every deck we explored, every twist in the hallway, every exhibit, we turned the corner and he'd be nearby watching us. We made it to the top deck, the control tower, where the breeze finally cut through the humidity, and my dad and sister were admiring the view, leaning against the railing outside. I wandered into the control room alone, drawn to the massive glass window and dusty levers. As I stood there for a moment, imagining what it would be like to command a ship like this. I was looking out at the sea when I felt it, the air behind me change, and I turned and there he was, the man standing in the middle of the room, not more than 5 feet away. His shorts were pulled down in the front, his genitals exposed. His face was calm as he watched me. I froze. The fear hit so hard, like a brick to the face. My legs eventually remembered how to move and I ran, sprinting out of the door and across the deck to my dad, but the man didn't follow. He drifted behind us like a shadow, and as we left the tower and descended the metal staircase towards the submarines, he stayed close enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't find a moment to tell my dad not what he was watching. It wasn't until we passed the gift shop nearing the exit gates that 2 security guards stopped him. They didn't wrestle him or shout. They just calmly stepped into his path like they'd done it before. I finally told my dad what happened, and what I saw, and his face changed, his jaw clenched like stone, and for a second I thought he was going to turn back and kill the man. Instead, he stormed over to the nearest staff member, a young woman in a polo shirt, and told her what happened. Her response? A sigh. "We've had other complaints. Same guy. Cops are on their way." It was just another day for her. Like a predator stalking was the most normal thing in the world. We never stepped foot on that ship again. We still drive past it sometimes on the way to my uncle's. It looms in the harbour, frozen in time. And every time I see it, I wonder how long the man had been following me for before I noticed.
I was once working in a morgue when a body came in. They informed me and asked me if I wanted to leave, and I responded that now I'll keep on working, when they brought in a rather sizable cadaver. They shut the door to the lab, and the next thing I heard is, "Oh crap, we should put him on the deeper table." Then the smell hit me. I had to go outside for about 20 minutes until the lead mortician came out and got me and explained to me that they had to switch the body fluids with embalming fluids for open caskets. When it's a larger human, they have a special tray table to let the blood etc. pour out onto the table. Well, the rookie just started doing the job he knew how to do, and the blood work was pouring all over the sides of the tray. It was one of the worst things I've ever seen. When I was in grade 6, I lived on Prince Edward Island, and we had the opportunity to talk to an officer. At the end, we got to ask a few questions, and of course there'd be the typical questions that kid would ask, like, "Did you ever shoot anyone?" He shot at but didn't actually shoot anyone, or so he told us. Then someone asks, "What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen?" I probably don't remember all the details because it was years ago, but it went kind of like this. There was a small island just off the coast of Prince Edward Island, and one night people had called the police to report a baby crying from the island. The police show up, and sure enough they heard a baby crying. They make their way over to the cries, but when they got to the island the crying stopped. They searched everywhere, and guess what they found? Nothing. No baby or any sign that someone might be there. They started to leave the island, and immediately the baby starts crying. Of course, they go back and it stops. I can't remember how long they were looking, but they never found anything. and you could tell it's been bothering him for a long time by the way he talked about it. It always creeped me out, and I'll doubt I'll never forget about it. Weird things happen on Prince Edward Island. I've only been an EMT for about 6 months. I had someone I had known for years walk up to me and say, "I don't feel well," and drop. Unresponsive to pain, breathing getting slower and weaker, no team to support me, and no prep time on my way to the scene or anything. I was pretty shaken afterwards, but it made me realize that the training works. By the time the ambulance responded, which was just a few minutes away, I had blood pressure, oxygen, blood sugar, and had him on oxygen while monitoring the breathing and getting ready to start bagging him. While this was a bit scary, it also gave me a lot more confidence in my abilities. I work in a pre-Civil War town that has lots of antebellum homes that survived the war. As you can imagine, ghost hunters have been to the town on several occasions. But there is one antebellum mansion that is more of a museum that gets alarm calls semi-frequently. Every time we get a call about the side door opening, we have to go and check. And when we do so, not only do we find that no one has ever trespassed, but the most unsettling thing of all is that every cabinet, door and drawer in the kitchen is always open, every single time. We've spoken to the caretaker about it on multiple occasions, and he says that it's been happening since he started looking after the place 30 years ago. Because as you probably suspected, those drawers and cupboards were definitely not left open before we got there. Now, we don't clear the place without backup. My great-aunt was in a dire difficulty during labor many years ago, so her husband and brother left to get a doctor. When they arrived back home, my great-aunt was all cleaned up, the baby in her arms swaddled, and her baby and room cleaned up too. The husband and brother were dumbfounded and asked what happened. My great-aunt said the midwife arrived a few minutes after they left. They hadn't managed to get a doctor or midwife, so questioned her. She stated that the most lovely woman with the longest plaited ponytail down her back helped her. Her brother went white and went home. He came back the next day with a picture, and my great-aunt confirmed, "Yep, that's her. Send my regards, please. We have to get her a gift." Her brother explained that the picture was in fact her own mother, who died during childbirth with my great-aunt.
My family lives at the bottom of a mountain and owns 25 acres. 5 are cleared and the rest is woodland. I have the back of an old decommissioned ambulance that we set up not far from the trailer so that I can run electricity and internet to it. Now, this is when I first started sleeping out in it, and a friend and I had done so at the time. Both of us were 16 and having a sleepover inside it. Unsure what time it was, but it was still pitch black outside when all I heard was a deep voice, far too deep for either of us, say, "Hey, hey," a few times. The first one sounded like it was outside, but the second one sounded as if it was inside with us. I rolled over and saw the friend fast asleep, eyes fully closed. I honestly thought I was dreaming because I was half awake. Nope. I mentioned it to my friend, and he said that they had heard it too, but just in a different time of night. And when they'd looked at me, I was out cold, eyes fully closed. Would it be a crackhead uttering nonsense through the windows that have screens on them, which we had slightly opened because of the summer nights? Or perhaps a person who died in the ambulance, but whose spirit hasn't moved on yet? I'm unsure, but it certainly left me with a lingering sense of dread.